There is a moment at the very start of every episode of Avatar, The Last Airbender, that you have almost certainly watched 100 times without ever really seeing. 4 symbols, painted in a heavy old brush style, one for each of the 4 elements, and I always assumed they were just pretty invented shapes, decoration, the kind of thing a fantasy show makes up to feel deep. They are not invented. Every one of them is real, authentic Chinese, and each element is quietly paired with a virtue: water with goodness, earth with strength, fire with fierceness, air with peace. Almost nobody notices, and that little detail turns out to be the whole show in miniature. Tonight we are going through all of it. Every tiny thing you walked past, the hidden writing, the buried foreshadowing, the jokes and the deaths and the rules of the world. So get comfortable, turn the lights down low, we will be here a while, and if you haven't subscribed yet, it genuinely helps us keep making these. Let me start with that writing, because once you know about it, you cannot unsee it. And it is the perfect example of the kind of care that runs under the whole series, like a second story you were never required to read. When the creators, Michael Dante DiMartino and Brian Konietzko, sat down to build this world, they made a decision that most shows would never bother with. Anytime a character in Avatar reads a scroll, or passes a shop sign, or opens a letter, or stands in front of a banner, the writing on that object is not gibberish. It is not a made-up runic alphabet invented to look mysterious. It is real Chinese calligraphy, written by an actual scholar, and if you can read Chinese, you can read the show. You can translate the wanted posters, you can read the labels in the apothecary, you can read the words on the walls of Ba Sing Se. The world is literate in a language that exists. The person responsible for that was a Hong Kong-born scholar and calligrapher named Dr. Siu-Leung Lee. The production found him, of all ways, through his personal calligraphy website and brought him on to make sure that every character painted on screen was correct. Not just correct as writing, but correct in period and correct in tone. This is the part that I find genuinely lovely. He did not just write everything in one plain modern hand. He used different historical styles depending on what the writing was for. Everyday things, shop signs and letters and posters, the ordinary paperwork of the world, are written in the standard traditional script that a person of that era would actually use. But the older, more spiritual, more elemental writing, the sort of text that touches the deep bones of the world, is written in far more archaic scripts, the ancient seal script, and the kind of characters that go all the way back to marks carved on oracle bones thousands of years ago. So the age of the writing on screen matches the age of the thing it describes. A tavern menu looks like a tavern menu. A piece of ancient elemental cosmology looks ancient. You were never meant to consciously notice this. It simply makes the world feel real at a level below your attention. And the traditional documents in the series follow the real old convention too. Before the 20th century, Chinese was commonly written in vertical columns, top to bottom, and read from the right side of the page to the left. Look closely at the scrolls the characters unroll, and that is exactly how the text runs. It would have been so much easier and completely invisible to almost every viewer to just write everything left to right like English. They did it the hard, correct way instead. Those 4 opening symbols I mentioned are the clearest little jewel of the whole system, so look closely at them for a second. They are written in that old seal script, the archaic ceremonial style, which already tells you these are meant to feel primordial. And each one is not just the character for its element. Each pairs the element with a second character naming a quality. Water is paired with a character meaning good or virtuous. Earth is paired with strong. Fire is paired with fierce. And air is paired with a character meaning harmonious or peaceful. If that pairing feels familiar, it should, because it echoes a line from the Tao Te Ching, the ancient Taoist text, which says that the highest good is like water. Avatar opens every single time by quietly quoting Taoist philosophy at you in a script most of its audience cannot read. That is the confidence of the thing. It hides its best ideas in plain sight and trusts that the story will carry you whether or not you ever find them. The same care runs through the names. A lot of the names in Avatar are not just nice sounds, they are small Chinese jokes and descriptions folded into the characters. Aang's name uses characters that lean toward the idea of peace and of soaring, of being lifted up, which for the airbending boy who wants nothing more than to glide and to avoid the fight fits almost too neatly. Katara's name evokes water, a droplet, and it rhymes in the ear with the English word cataract, which as well as an eye condition is an old word for a waterfall. Toph is the best one, and it works in 2 languages at once. Her given name plays on a Chinese word that means to hold up, to support in the palm of your hand, which is a lovely image for an earthbender who quite literally holds up stone. But it is also a deliberate pun on the English word tough, which is the single truest word anyone has ever used to describe her. Her family name Beifeng simply means north. Iroh's name uses the character for mugwort, which is a herb. And here's the detail that gets me. Mugwort is a herb long used in traditional Chinese medicine and healing. The kind old firebender is named after a gentle healing plant. Azula echoes the Spanish word azul, meaning blue, which suits her cold blue flames. Momo is the Japanese word for peach, which matters because he is found stealing a peach. Yue, the northern princess, is named with the character for moon, which, if you know where her story is going, lands like a quiet little bell. The dragons Ran and Sha are named with characters meaning to ignite and to burn. And the great city Omashu is a blend of the names Oma and Shu, two legendary lovers from the city's own founding legend, which the series actually tells you if you are paying attention. Even the name of the biggest place in the series is a small hidden pun. Ba Sing Se, the giant walled Earth Kingdom capital, is called in the series the Impenetrable City, and that translation is loose and gentle. The characters that make up its name more literally mean something like the eternally solid or the forever strong city, a city named for the promise that it can never fall, which, if you have seen Book 2, you will recognize as one of the great dark ironies of the whole series, because the whole point of that story is that it does fall quietly from the inside, without a single wall being broken. The name was setting up the heartbreak the entire time. I go on about all this at the start because it sets the terms for everything else we're going to talk about tonight. Avatar is a show that is deeper than it needs to be at every layer, in ways that reward you for looking twice and never punish you for not. You can watch the whole thing as a bright, funny, exciting kid's adventure about a boy who saves the world, and it works perfectly. Or you can start pulling on the threads, the writing, the names, the martial arts, the philosophy, and find that every thread goes somewhere real. That is rare. Most shows that pretend to that kind of depth are bluffing, and if you look closely, the detail falls apart in your hands. This one holds. The closer you look, the more there is. So let us keep looking. The next layer down, and maybe the one I love most, is the fighting. Watch any bending duel in Avatar, and it looks fluid and beautiful and a little dreamlike. And it is easy to assume the animators simply invented graceful poses that felt magical. They did not invent them. Every one of the 4 bending styles is choreographed from a real, specific Chinese martial art. And once you know which is which, you can never watch a fight the same way again because you start to see the discipline underneath the fantasy. The person who built that system was a martial arts consultant named Sifu Kisu, and he worked on the fights across the whole series, which is an extraordinary level of commitment for what most people assumed was a Saturday morning cartoon. He did not give the 4 nations 4 flavors of generic kung fu. He gave each one a distinct, real style whose actual character matches the personality of that element. And the fit is so exact that it teaches you how the world works without a single line of dialogue. Airbending is based on baguazhang, often just called bagua, a style built on constant circular walking, on evasion, on never being where the strike lands, on turning an opponent's force around them rather than meeting it. That is airbending completely. Aang almost never attacks. He spins, he redirects, he slips aside. He lets the aggression pass through the space where he used to be. The monks raised him not to fight, and the martial art the animators chose for him is among the most evasive and least confrontational styles there is. His whole philosophy is encoded in the way he moves his feet. Waterbending is based on Tai Chi, which you have probably seen practiced slowly in a park at dawn. All those flowing, continuous, unhurried movements that shift weight and redirect momentum. Tai Chi is about softness overcoming hardness, about yielding and turning, and that is exactly how waterbending reads on screen. The way Katara pulls and pushes and lets the water follow the long curves of her arms. It flows because the real art flows. And there is a lovely logic to it because water in the series responds to the pull of the moon and the tides, and the style built on continuous circular flow is the perfect body language for something that moves like the sea. Earthbending is based on Hung Gar, a southern style famous for its rooted, immovable stances for planting the feet like the roots of a tree and generating power from the ground up through strong, direct, powerful strikes. Earthbenders in Avatar fight exactly like that. They stand their ground, they stomp, they do not dance around you, they meet force with greater force, and they wait for you to come to them. Earth is the element of substance and of standing firm. and Hungar is the martial expression of refusing to be moved. Firebending is based on Northern Shaolin, which favors long, aggressive, extended strikes, powerful kicks, a relentless forward drive. It is an attacking style, all offense and reach and momentum. And that is the Fire Nation in a single word: aggression. The constant push forward, the belief that attack is the answer to everything. Watch Zhao or Ozai or Azula fight, and you are watching a real, ferocious, striking art. The nation's entire military philosophy is written into the shapes their bodies make. But here is the detail that proves how carefully this was all thought through, and it is one of my favorite small facts about the entire production. Toph does not fight like the other earthbenders. She could not because Toph is blind, and her whole power comes from feeling vibrations through the earth, from reading the position of everything around her by touch through the soles of her feet. So the series did not choreograph her from Hungar like everyone else. Toph's earthbending is built from a completely different martial art called Chugar, a southern praying mantis style, which is a compact, close-range form built around continuous tactile contact, feeling out your opponent by staying in touch with them, sensing their next move through your own hands and arms rather than watching for it. It is a style for someone who reads the fight by feel rather than by sight. They gave the blind girl the one martial art whose entire method is seeing through touch. That is the difference between a show that decorates itself with kung fu and a show that understands it. And to make that difference real, Toph's movements were choreographed by a different consultant who specialized in that particular style, so that even her body language would set her apart from every other earthbender on screen. There is one more small tribute buried in the fighting, and you would only catch it if you already knew the man's name. When the series introduces Sokka's swordmaster in Book 3, a quiet, retired master named Piandao, who teaches Sokka the discipline of the blade, that character was created as an homage to Sifu Kisu himself, the consultant who built all the bending styles. The man who taught the show how to fight got written into the series as the man who teaches Sokka how to fight. It is a thank you letter hidden in plain sight in the shape of a character. Once you have all this in your head, the fights stop being spectacle and start being language. When a firebender and an airbender clash, you are watching an attacking style meet an evasive one, offense against redirection, and the outcome of the fight is arguing something about the two ways of being in the world. When Toph plants her feet and refuses to move while chaos flies around her, that stillness is a real martial principle, not a pose. Avatar taught its animators real kung fu, and then used real kung fu to tell you who these people are. Nobody asked it to go that far. It went that far anyway. If the martial arts tell you how each nation fights, the design of the nations tells you where each one comes from. And this is another place where the series did far more homework than it ever needed to. The four nations are not generic fantasy kingdoms. Each is built carefully and respectfully on a real culture from our own world. And the details go all the way down into the architecture, the clothing, the food, the spiritual life. Once you can name the sources, the whole map of the world clicks into a new focus. The air nomads are drawn most directly from Tibetan Buddhist monks and more broadly from the Shaolin monastic tradition. You can see it everywhere. The saffron and orange robes are the robes of Buddhist monks. The temples sit impossibly high on remote mountaintops, reachable only by flight, exactly the way real monasteries were built in the high places of Tibet, deliberately set apart from the ordinary world. The air nomads are pacifists, vegetarians, deeply spiritual, organized around temples rather than around a king, and their whole way of life is about detachment and letting go, which is Buddhist thought at its core. Even the idea that reaches its terrible payoff later, the idea that a people this gentle and this withdrawn from worldly power could be wiped out almost overnight, has a grim echo in real history. The series did not pick pacifist mountain monks by accident. It picked the culture whose entire philosophy is non-attachment, and then it built its hero out of the last survivor of that culture, a boy who has to learn that letting go is not the same as running away. The water tribes are built on the cultures of the Arctic, the Inuit, and Yupik peoples of the far north. The southern water tribe, Katara and Sokka's home, lives in a landscape of ice and snow, in dwellings of ice and snow, in thick, fur-lined parkas, hunting and fishing at the edge of a frozen sea. The clothing, the tools, the way the community is organized around survival in a brutal cold, all of it draws on real northern peoples. The Northern Water Tribe takes that same foundation and adds something grander, a great city threaded through with canals and waterways, ice architecture on the scale of a capital, which gives waterbending a place to be monumental rather than merely domestic. And there is a quiet sadness folded into the Southern tribes specifically because when we meet them, they are a shadow of what they once were, worn down by a century of raids, their benders taken away, an old proud culture reduced to a handful of families. That is not just a plot point. It rhymes uncomfortably with what happens to real indigenous cultures under the pressure of a colonizing power. And the show lets that resonance sit there without spelling it out. The Earth Kingdom is Imperial China, and it is by far the largest and most varied of the nations, which fits, because China across its history was vast and enormously varied too. But the series gets specific in one place. Ba Sing Se, the Great Walled Capital, is modeled closely on the imperial capital of the Qing dynasty, on Beijing. And if you look at the Earth King's palace, you are looking at something built in clear homage to the Forbidden City. That same grand, walled, tier-upon-tier architecture, the endless ceremonial approach, the sense of a ruler buried so deep inside layers of wall and protocol that he has lost touch with the world he supposedly commands. That last detail turns out to be the whole tragedy of Ba Sing Se, an Earth King so insulated by walls and by the secret police who really run the city that he does not even know his own nation is at war. The design is the story. The walls that are meant to protect become the walls that blind. And the Fire Nation is most often read as Imperial Japan, particularly the militarized, expansionist Japan of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The era when a modernizing island nation built a powerful military and set out to conquer its neighbors. You can see it in the Fire Nation's industrial edge, its factories and its war machines, its disciplined uniforms, and its cult of the strong. But the Fire Nation is not only that. Its designs pull in elements from across East and Southeast Asia, and in one striking corner of the world, the ancient sun warriors and their sun and dragon iconography. It reaches toward Mesoamerican influence, toward the stepped pyramids and sun worship of cultures much closer to Central America than to Japan. The Fire Nation is a blend, an empire assembled out of many sources, which is fitting for the nation that wants to absorb the whole world into itself. What I find so impressive about all of this is that Avatar never lectures you on it. It never stops the story to explain that the air nomads are Tibetan-coded, or that Ba Sing Se is Qing Dynasty Beijing. It just builds the world correctly and trusts the texture to do the work. A child watching feels, without being able to say why, that the Water Tribe is cold and the Fire Nation is dangerous, and Ba Sing Se is old and grand and slightly suffocating. The research is invisible. It is load-bearing but hidden, holding up the emotional truth of each place while never once asking for credit. And when you go back later and learn the sources, you do not feel tricked. You feel like you are being told the truth in a language you did not yet know how to read, which honestly is the same feeling as discovering the writing on the walls was real Chinese all along. The series keeps rewarding the same act of paying closer attention. There is one more layer worth naming because it connects the cultures back to the elements themselves. The four nations are not just four cultures stapled onto four powers at random. Each culture was chosen because its real-world values match its element. The Airbenders are spiritual and detached, like air. The Water Tribes are communal and adaptive and bound to the tides, like water. The Earth Kingdom is stubborn and enduring and vast, like Earth. The Fire Nation is passionate and driven and dangerous, like fire. The series built a world where geography, culture, philosophy, martial art, and elemental magic all point in the same direction for each people, so that everything you learn about a nation reinforces everything else. That is not world building as decoration. That is world building as argument, and it is a big part of why this world feels more solid than almost any other in animation. Now let us talk about foreshadowing, because this is where Avatar quietly separates itself from almost everything else made for children, and probably from most things made for adults too. A great deal of what happens in the back half of the series is set up carefully dozens of episodes earlier, in ways you're not meant to catch the first time, but which reward you enormously on the second. The show plants things and then walks away from them, trusting that they will still be there when it comes back. And the best of these is a little game tile. Very early in Book 1, in an episode where Iroh has misplaced a small possession, he becomes frantic about recovering a single game piece, a white lotus tile from the board game Pai Sho, and he says a line that seems, at the time, like nothing more than an old man's harmless eccentricity. He says that Pai Sho is more than just a game. You watch it and you think, all right, the funny uncle is attached to his little tile, and you move on. It looks like a throwaway character beat, a bit of color for Iroh. It is nothing of the kind. That tile is the first thread of one of the show's biggest hidden structures, because much later in Book 2, in the middle of the desert when the group is lost and desperate, Iroh uses that same white lotus in a way that finally shows you what it means. He arranges the lotus tile in a particular opening on a Pai Sho board in front of a stranger, and the stranger responds with a specific phrase, that the white lotus opens wide to those who know her secrets. It is a recognition code, a password exchanged between members of a secret society hidden inside the moves of a board game, so that they can identify one another anywhere in the world without ever saying a dangerous word aloud. Iroh is a member of a secret order called the Order of the White Lotus, an ancient society that spans all 4 nations and cares about knowledge, beauty, and balance above loyalty to any single kingdom. The lotus tile from Book 1 was never a quirk. It was a membership card, and Avatar made you wait most of a season to understand what you had already seen. And that order does not fully pay off until the very end of the series, when the White Lotus finally assembles as a group, and you discover that some of the strongest masters you have met across the whole show, Iroh, the mad genius King Bumi, the waterbending master Pakku, Sokka's swordmaster Piandao, and the firebending deserter Zhong Zhong, were all members of the same secret society the entire time, connected under your nose. Every one of those characters was introduced separately in different books, in different contexts, and only at the end do you learn they were all threads of one hidden network. That is the reward for the patient viewer. The tile in Book 1 is the seed of a payoff 2 full seasons away. The same episode that opens the series is full of this kind of buried setup if you go back and look. There is a small moment where Iroh, relaxing on Zuko's ship, is playing a game and places a particular tile, an air tile, on top of a fire tile. It is easy to read as nothing, just an old man fiddling with a game while his nephew broods. But given everything the series becomes, fans have long read it as a quiet little omen. An airbender placed on top of the Fire Nation, the very shape of how the story is going to end. I want to be careful here because this one lives more in interpretation than in confirmed authorial intent, and I do not want to tell you the creators have sworn it was deliberate. But it is the kind of image the series plants constantly, and it is sitting right there in the first episode. What is not ambiguous in that first episode is the difference between how Zuko and Iroh react to the beam of light. When Aang wakes up inside the iceberg and releases a great column of light into the sky, visible for miles, Zuko sees it and knows instantly, with total certainty, that it is the Avatar. He does not need to be persuaded. His entire being snaps to attention. Iroh, in the same moment, tries to wave it off, suggests it's nothing to worry about, maybe just the celestial lights. That tiny split in reaction tells you everything about who these two men are before the show has explained a single thing about them. Zuko is the one consumed by the hunt, so wound around his obsession that he can read the sky like a hunting dog reads a scent. Iroh is the one who would rather not chase, who counsels patience and calm, who is already, in the first 5 minutes, already trying to talk his nephew down from the thing that is eating him alive. Their whole relationship, the entire arc of the next 3 years, is right there in how each of them looks at the same light. The series does this so often that once you start noticing it, you begin to distrust the idea of a throwaway moment at all. A misplaced tile, an old man's card game, a difference in how two people look at a light in the sky. None of it is idle. The writers were building a machine where the small pieces all connect, and they had the patience to place a part in Book 1 and not use it until Book 3, and the confidence to trust that the audience would either catch it or not and be rewarded either way. That patience is rare, and it is a big part of why the series holds up to the kind of obsessive rewatching that most children's television simply cannot survive. Some of the finest foreshadowing in the series is not in the plot at all. It is in the animation, in the way the artists choose to frame a face or place a strand of hair, and two characters in particular are told to you visually long before they are told to you in words. The first is Zuko, and the tell is his scar. Zuko's face is not symmetrical. The left side, the scarred side, is the mark of everything that has been done to him. the burn his own father gave him, the banishment, the shame, the years of chasing an impossible task to win back a love that was never really on offer. The right side is untouched, the face he might have had. And the animators use this constantly, with real intention. They will frame Zuko so that you see only his unscarred profile when he is being gentle or hopeful, or reaching toward the good person he could become. And they will turn him so the scar dominates the frame when he is consumed by anger or by the hunt. The two halves of his face are the two halves of his nature, the man he was made into and the man he is trying to become. And Avatar plays them against each other in shot after shot. His whole redemption arc is written on his skin, and the camera keeps quietly reminding you which side is winning. And there is a companion detail that people sometimes miss the meaning of. Katara, who can heal, who at one point holds a rare vial of spirit water capable of mending grievous wounds, never heals Zuko's scar. There is a moment where the possibility floats between them, a tenderness, an offer almost made. And it does not happen. The scar stays. I think that is exactly right. And it would have been a lesser show that erased it. The scar is not a blemish to be fixed. It is his history, the proof of where he came from, the permanent reminder of the father he had to break away from. To heal it would be to pretend it never happened. Zuko does not get to unlive his past. He gets to carry it and become someone better in spite of it. And the unhealed scar is the series insisting on that harder, truer version of redemption. He wears what was done to him for the rest of his life. The second character written into the animation before the script catches up is Azula, and her tell is her hair. Early on, the series makes a point, almost a joke, of Azula's absolute perfection, and it does it through a tiny fixation on grooming. Her two elderly advisors fuss over her, and there is a moment built around a single hair out of place. The idea that even one strand escaping is intolerable, that Azula must be flawless down to the last detail. It reads at first as a bit of characterization, the cold perfectionist princess. But it is a fuse, laid early, and it burns for 2 whole seasons before it goes off. Because when Azula finally breaks, and she does break completely, on what should be the day of her greatest triumph, her coronation, the show tells you she is unraveling by unraveling her hair. Strand by strand, it comes loose. The perfect, controlled, gleaming princess sits before a mirror with her hair coming apart, and she cannot bear it, and she keeps trying to fix it and cannot. The visual language that was established as a throwaway character quirk becomes the exact image of her mind coming undone. The girl who could not tolerate one hair out of place ends the series with everything out of place, inside and out. It is a wonderfully patient piece of visual writing, a setup planted seasons before its payoff, and it works on you even if you never consciously connect the two moments. Azula's breakdown has a deeper wound underneath it too, and the series sets that up as well. When she finally comes apart, she hallucinates her mother, Ursa, in the mirror, and what pours out of her is the belief that her own mother thought she was a monster. That is the real fracture at the center of Azula, the sense that the one person who was supposed to love her unconditionally saw something wrong in her. And the tragedy Avatar is arguing underneath it all is that Azula is not a monster who happened to have a difficult mother. She is a child who was shaped deliberately into a weapon, praised only for being terrifying, taught that fear is the only reliable form of love, and then blamed for becoming exactly what she was made to be. Her cruelty is manufactured. When the mask finally cracks, what is underneath is not evil. It is a frightened, abandoned girl who never once got to be a person instead of an instrument. The series does not excuse her, but it refuses to let her be simple, and it lays the groundwork for that complexity long before the payoff. There is one more visual whisper worth pointing out because it foreshadows a betrayal that lands like a thunderclap. Azula's 2 closest companions are Mai and Ty Lee, and if you watch carefully during Azula's great moment of triumph, the speech where she consolidates her victory, the animators give Mai and Ty Lee a small, meaningful glance at each other. It is quick, it is easy to miss, but it plants the seed of the moment much later at the Boiling Rock prison when the 2 of them turn on Azula to save Zuko and the others when Mai says, in effect, that she loves Zuko more than she fears Azula, and Ty Lee steps in to help her. The loyalty that will one day crack was already showing a hairline fracture, and the series put it in a single shared look you are not required to notice. That is the level this thing operates at. It is telling you the future in glances. Let us talk about how bending actually works, because the show is far more disciplined about its own rules than most fantasy is, and a lot of the details you missed are hidden in the mechanics. The magic in Avatar is not a bag of anything goes tricks. It has structure, it has limits, and the rare exceptions to the rules are earned and explained. Start with lightning, which is the most dangerous thing a firebender can do. Generating lightning is presented as the peak of firebending, and it requires something almost paradoxical, a state of complete emotional calm and detachment. It is called, in a sense, the cold-blooded fire, and only the coldest, most iron-disciplined firebenders can produce it. Ozai can, Azula can, and the fact that this cold precision comes so easily to her tells you something chilling about her. Iroh can, though he chooses not to use it as a weapon, but notice who cannot. Zuko cannot generate lightning, not across the whole series, and the reason is beautiful. Zuko is too full of turmoil, too churned up by shame and anger and grief and love, to reach the empty stillness that lightning demands. His inability to make lightning is not a gap in his training. It is a portrait of his heart. He feels too much. And the series is honest about this to the end, so if you ever picture Zuko hurling lightning at someone, that is a memory Avatar never actually gave you. What Zuko can do instead is redirect it, and the origin of that technique is one of the loveliest pieces of hidden world building in the series. Lightning redirection was not an ancient firebending secret handed down through the Fire Nation. It was invented recently by Iroh, and he invented it by studying waterbenders. Iroh watched the way waterbenders take an opponent's force and turn it aside rather than block it, the way they redirect energy instead of opposing it, and he adapted that principle to the deadliest attack in his own art. The idea is to accept the lightning into one arm, guide it through the body along a safe path, crucially steering it away from the heart and down through the stomach, and release it out through the other arm. A firebender learned to survive lightning by thinking like a waterbender. That detail alone tells you the series' deepest value, that the elements are not enemies, that wisdom is borrowed across borders, that the old man who preaches balance actually practices it in the way he built his signature move. Iroh, Zuko, and Aang can all redirect, but the invention belongs to Iroh, and it came from the humility to learn from a rival element. Now, metal bending, because this is the single most common mistake people make when they retell the series, and I want to get it exactly right. For most of history, earthbenders could not bend metal. Metal was considered purified earth, refined and processed until the earthy essence was gone, and it was simply outside what an earthbender could touch. Toph changes that, and the circumstances matter enormously. Toph does not discover metal bending in some quiet moment of study, and she absolutely does not discover it, as it is sometimes wrongly told, in the back of a Fire Nation cart. What actually happens is that Toph is captured and locked inside a metal cage. Her captors are not the Fire Nation. They are two Earth Kingdom bounty hunters, Xin Fu and Master Yu, who have been hired by Toph's own father, Lao Beifong, to drag her back home to the sheltered life she ran away from. Trapped inside that metal box, cut off from the Earth she needs to see and to fight, Toph does the impossible out of sheer desperation. She feels for the tiny impurities still trapped inside the metal, the trace bits of Earth that were never fully refined out, and she bends those, and through them she bends the metal itself, and she tears the cage open. She invents an entirely new discipline because she was caged by people her father sent, and she refused to be helpless. That is the real story, and it is far better than the mistaken version because it ties her greatest breakthrough directly to her greatest wound, the family that wanted to lock her away. And the show sets even this up in advance. Well before Toph tears open that cage, back at the Fire Nation drill assaulting Ba Sing Se, there is a moment where Aang, frustrated, wishes aloud that he could just bend the metal in his way. The idea is spoken into the air as an impossibility, a thing benders simply cannot do. And then a few episodes later, Toph makes it real. The wish is the setup. Toph is the payoff. Then there is blood bending, and this one comes with a rule you have to state carefully because it is another place people get tripped up. Bloodbending is the horrifying ability to bend the water inside a living body, to seize control of a person's blood and puppet their limbs against their will. In Aang's era, it is bound by one strict condition. It can only be done under the light of a full moon, when a waterbender's power is at its absolute peak. It is invented, or at least perfected, by a bitter old survivor named Hama, whose story is one of the darkest the series ever tells, and Avatar foreshadows the horror before it names it. When we first meet Hama, there is an image of puppets, marionettes, tumbling out of a closet in her house, little figures on strings, and only later do you understand that image was a warning, because Hama has learned to turn living people into puppets on invisible strings of their own blood. The falling marionettes are the whole reveal, hidden in plain sight before you know to be afraid. I should add one careful note for anyone who has seen the sequel series, because the full moon rule is specific to this era. Later stories complicate it. But within Avatar itself, within Aang's time, bloodbending belongs to the full moon, and it is treated as an abomination that even the people capable of it recoil from. There is one rule in this world that is bigger than all the others, and the series hides its full weight until the moment it matters most. It is the rule that governs the Avatar itself, the cycle of reincarnation, and there is a hidden catastrophe built into it that most casual viewers never fully register. The Avatar is a single soul that is reborn, life after life, into a body from a different nation, following a fixed order through the four elements. When one Avatar dies, the spirit passes on to the next in the cycle, and that has happened over and over for thousands of years, an unbroken chain of the same being wearing different faces. Aang is only the latest link. Before him was Roku of the Fire Nation. Before Roku was Kyoshi of the Earth Kingdom. Before her Kuruk of the Water Tribes. Before him Yangchen of the Air Nomads. And so the wheel turns, water to earth to fire to air, on and on into the deep past. That much most viewers pick up. But here's the thing the series holds back until Book 2, and it is terrifying. The cycle can be broken, permanently. Because the Avatar draws on the power and the wisdom of all the past lives, there is a state, the Avatar state, in which all of that accumulated power floods into the current Avatar at once. The eyes and tattoos glow, and the being becomes almost unstoppable. It is the ultimate defense mechanism, but it is also the ultimate vulnerability, and this is the trap. If the Avatar is killed while in the Avatar state, the reincarnation cycle does not simply continue with the next life. It ends forever. Because in that state, the current Avatar is fused with all the previous ones, so to kill the Avatar in that moment is to kill every past life at the same time, the whole chain, all the way back to the beginning. The Avatar would cease to exist, and the world would lose its one being capable of keeping balance, not for a lifetime, but for all time. Roku himself warns Aang of this. The single greatest power the Avatar has is also the one door through which the entire institution could be destroyed in an instant. And the show does not leave that as an abstract threat. It very nearly happens, and here's the detail that even many devoted fans do not fully register. In the Book 2 finale, in the crystal catacombs deep beneath Ba Sing Se, Aang tries to open himself fully to the Avatar state. And in that exact vulnerable moment, Azula strikes him with lightning in the back, and Aang falls. And Aang does not merely get hurt, Aang dies. His heart stops. He is, for a moment, actually dead, and the only reason the story does not end there, the only reason the Avatar cycle is not severed forever, is that Katara has, by pure chance, been carrying a small amount of spirit water from the North Pole, a rare substance with true healing power, and she uses it to bring him back. Think about how close that was. Aang was killed in the Avatar state. By the rule, the series had already carefully established that should have been the permanent end of the Avatar, the end of the cycle, the end of the world's balance. It was undone by a single vial of water that Katara happened to be carrying and had not yet used for anything else. The stakes of that scene are not that a hero got hurt. The stakes are that the entire cosmic order of the world came within one lucky vial of ending. Avatar set the rule up early and calmly and then cashed it in for one of the most genuinely frightening moments in the series. Now, the counterpart to that ending is a beginning, a power older than the four elements, and the series seeds it long before it becomes the answer to the entire war. That power is energy bending. In the finale, Aang faces an impossible moral problem. Ozai must be stopped, but Aang is an air nomad, raised by monks to hold all life sacred, and everything in him refuses to kill, even a tyrant, even to save the world. His friends and his past lives tell him there is no other way. And then, on the eve of the comet, Aang meets an ancient lion turtle, an enormous, primordial creature from the time before the Avatar. And it teaches him a lost art. Before humans learned to bend the elements from the lion turtles, the oldest technique was the bending of energy itself, the ability to reach into another person's spirit and to bend their energy, to give bending or to take it away. Aang uses it to strip Ozai of his fire bending forever, defeating him without killing him, solving the unsolvable problem. He does not murder the villain, he unmakes the thing that made the villain dangerous. But that solution does not come from nowhere, and this is where the setup is genuinely elegant. The lion turtle is not invented in the last episode. An image of a lion turtle appears much earlier in the Great Spirit Library out in the desert, painted among the ancient knowledge. So the creature exists in the deep lore of the world long before it walks into the finale. The philosophical groundwork is laid too in the teachings of the guru who tries to open Aang's chakras, in the idea that the separation between all things is an illusion, that energy flows and connects everything, and the raw mechanic, the idea that a person's inner energy can be reached and shut off, is demonstrated over and over by Tai Li, whose chai-blocking jabs can paralyze a bender and cut them off from their power with a few precise strikes. All of it is preparing you, without your noticing, for the idea that bending is energy, and energy can be touched, so that when the lion turtle finally speaks of bending a person's very energy, it does not feel like a cheat pulled out at the last second. It feels like the series reaching back and picking up threads it had left lying around for 2 seasons and tying them into exactly the knot it needed. The energy bending does carry its own price, a warning that to bend another's energy, your own spirit must be unbendable, or you will be corrupted and destroyed, and Aang can only do it because his spirit holds. The answer to the whole war was hiding in a painting in a library the entire time. Here is a piece of the world that most viewers absorb backwards, because the Fire Nation spends the whole series teaching everyone, including the audience, a lie about where firebending comes from. If you asked most people what fuels a firebender, they would tell you anger, rage. The hotter the temper, the hotter the flame. And that is exactly what the Fire Nation military believes and trains into its soldiers, that firebending is drawn from fury, that you must be angry to be powerful. It is a soldier's understanding of a thing that is not about being a soldier at all, and the show sets out carefully to correct it. The truth is revealed in Book 3, when Zuko, who has lost his fire, his inner flame gone cold after he turned against his father and his nation, travels with Aang to find the real source of their art. What they discover is that firebending did not come from anger, and it did not come from the Fire Nation, and it certainly did not come from Sazon's comet. Firebending comes from the dragons, and behind the dragons from the sun itself. The dragons were the original firebenders, the first masters of the flame, and long ago humans learned the art from them. Fire, in its true form, is not destruction, and it is not rage. It is life, energy, warmth, the same force that makes things grow. Zuko has to unlearn everything the war taught him. His fire had gone out because he had only ever known fire as a weapon fueled by hate and fear. And once those were stripped away, he had nothing left to burn with. He has to rediscover fire as life before he can bend it again. This is dramatized in one of the loveliest sequences in the series, at the hidden city of the Sun Warriors. An ancient civilization everyone believed extinct, still secretly alive and still keeping the old ways. There, Zuko and Aang are brought before the last 2 living dragons named Ran and Sha, and they are made to perform an ancient dance, the original form of firebending, and to prove they understand its true meaning. The dragons judge their hearts and then breathe fire around them, not to burn them, but to show them the fire in its full spectrum of color, the many-hued flame that is the deepest expression of the art. It is a lesson delivered by the last of a species that everyone thought was gone. And that word, last, is where one of Iroh's oldest secrets finally comes into focus. Throughout the earlier part of the series, Iroh carries a reputation, a proud claim really, that he once killed the last dragon, an act that earned him a grand title and enormous prestige as a firebender. It is presented as one of his great feats, but when Zuko and Aang meet Ran and Sha, living, breathing dragons, the whole thing turns over in your hands. Iroh never killed the last dragon. He found them, learned from them, and then lied to the entire world. told everyone the last dragons were dead, precisely so that no one would ever hunt them again. He sacrificed his own honest reputation, let people believe he was a dragon slayer in order to protect the very creatures he claimed to have destroyed. It is one of the most Iroh things imaginable, a deep act of protection disguised as a hunter's trophy, and you only understand it in retrospect once you see the dragons are alive. The man who preaches balance secretly saved the source of his own element and took the credit for its extinction to keep it safe. Now hold that against the comet, because this is the piece people most often get tangled. Sazan's comet is enormous in the story. It is the ticking clock of the whole finale, and it grants firebenders a vast surge of power when it passes. So it is easy to walk away thinking the comet is somehow the origin of firebending, the wellspring of the power. It is not. The comet does not create firebending, and it does not fuel it in any ongoing way. It only amplifies what is already there, turns the volume up for the brief window it is overhead, and then it is gone for another 100 years. The true, constant source is always the sun, which is why firebenders draw strength from daylight and lose it during a solar eclipse, when the moon blots out the sun, and firebending simply stops working. That eclipse, the day of black sun, is the one window when firebenders are powerless, and the invasion is timed around it precisely because the sun, not the comet, and not anger, is what firebending actually runs on. The comet is a spectacular temporary boost. The sun is the engine. Getting that straight changes how you read the entire war, because it means the Fire Nation built a 100-year campaign of conquest on a fundamental misunderstanding of its own power, believing fire was for burning when fire was always meant for warmth and for life. The nation weaponized something it never really understood, and the person who understood it best, who knew fire was life and not death, was the gentle old man drinking tea in the corner, the one everyone underestimated, carrying the truth of his own element like a secret he was in no hurry to explain. Let us come up from the deep lore for a while and look at the edges of the frame, at the background of Avatar, because the series fills its margins with small, recurring people and creatures who most viewers register only as scenery, and almost every one of them has more going on than you noticed. The best known is a man and his vegetables. The cabbage merchant is the great running gag of the series, and he was never meant to be. He first appears in an early Book 1 episode in the city of Omashu, a humble street vendor pushing a cart piled high with cabbages. And Aang and the group, in the middle of some chaos, destroy his cart, and he cries out in anguish for his cabbages. He was written as a one-off, a single throwaway joke. But the crew loved him, and so he keeps coming back, this cosmically unlucky man whose cart is annihilated over and over across the world. His cabbages are thrown at pirates, his cart is barred at a ferry crossing and then wrecked by a wandering beast. A creature eats his produce, and he finally just gives up. He appears in only 4 episodes of the entire television series, which surprises people, because he loomed so large in memory that fans assume he was everywhere. 4 episodes, and the actor who voiced him, James Tsai, cared enough about this tiny, recurring nobody that he came back to play him again decades later in the live-action adaptation. But here is the reward for anyone who kept track of the poor man, and it is the kind of long-game payoff this show adores. In the sequel series set 70 years later, his descendants have turned that ruined cabbage cart into an empire. There is a huge corporation called Cabbage Corp, a major industrial and technology company, and outside its headquarters stands a statue of the merchant himself, the man who lost 1,000 cabbages, immortalized in bronze. The universe finally paid him back with interest. The joke became a dynasty. Then there is the man who is his own biggest fan, and I mean that literally. On Kyoshi Island in Book 1, there is an excitable villager, a superfan of the Avatar, who gets so overwhelmed with excitement at the sight of Aang that he faints, foaming at the mouth. Fans nicknamed him Foaming Mouth Guy. That alone is a fun little background gag, but 2 details make him better. The first is that he is voiced by one of Avatar's own creators, Brian Konietzko, credited under a joke pseudonym, so a co-creator gave himself a cameo as the world's most hysterical Avatar fanboy, which is a lovely bit of self-deprecation from the man who helped invent the whole thing. The second is even stranger. He shows up again later in Book 2 and has the exact same fit, the same fainting, the same foam, except this time Aang is not even there. He is just a man who apparently collapses in ecstasy at Avatar-related excitement, whether or not there is an actual Avatar in the room. The series never explains it. It just lets him faint again, and if you catch it, it is one of the funniest, deep background gags in the series. The living world is stitched together with these tiny figures. There is a fisherman in one of the Fire Nation episodes, a grumpy man in a rowboat who insists to Katara that he is actually 3 different brothers, Doc and Shu and Bushi, and that you can tell them apart by which hat he happens to be wearing. He changes hats and changes identities and clearly is one lonely man playing all the parts himself, and the series never breaks the joke, never confirms it out loud. There is a preening professional wrestler in the earthbending fighting circuit called the Boulder, who speaks about himself only in the third person and is a direct, affectionate parody of a certain famous wrestler-turned-actor who used to do exactly that. There are Azula's 2 elderly advisors, identical twin sisters called Lo and Li, so alike that they seem to finish each other's existence, not just their sentences. There is the smallest of the freedom fighters, a tiny boy who goes by the Duke and refuses to explain the thee. These people are the texture of the world and the care taken with them. The fact that a fisherman gets a whole 3 brothers bit and a fainting fan gets a running joke across 2 seasons is exactly why the world feels populated rather than merely drawn. And then there are the animals, which are their own quiet marvel of world building because almost nothing in Avatar is just one animal. The world runs on hybrids. There is no plain duck, there is a turtle duck. There is no ordinary bear, or rather there almost never is. There are platypus bears and Komodo rhinos and ostrich horses and saber-toothed moose lions and a great tracking beast called a shirshu that has no eyes at all and hunts entirely by smell with a long whip of a tongue. The convention is so total, so consistent, that the show can build a joke on it. When the Earth King is revealed to have a pet bear, the group is baffled because a bear should be a bear something, a bear that is also another animal, and they keep asking what kind of bear it is, a platypus bear, a skunk bear, and the answer keeps coming back that it is just a bear, a plain, single, unhybridized bear. In this world, the ordinary animal is the freak. That is a joke you can only make if you have built the rule so carefully that the audience feels the exception before it is even pointed out. And there are a precious few other non-hybrids, the flying bison and the winged lemurs among them. And their rarity is not an accident either, because those are the animals tied to the airbenders, the vanished people, which makes their strangeness feel like the last trace of a world that is mostly gone. Which brings it back around, as this show always does, to Aang, because 2 of those rare animals are his only companions from the old world. Momo, the winged lemur, is one of the last of his kind, found at the ruined southern air temple, and he is named, as we touched on earlier, for the peach he is caught stealing. Appa, the sky bison, is the last known member of a species that were the original airbenders, the animals who taught the art to humans in the first place. So when you watch Aang goofing around with his flying bison and his little lemur, you are not watching a boy and his pets. You are watching the last 3 survivors of a murdered culture keep each other company, a boy, a bison, and a lemur, each of them the last or nearly the last of what they are, holding on to one another across the ruins of everything they lost. The series lets that sit under the comedy and never once makes you look at it directly. But it is there, in the margins, the way the best of this show always is. If you want the single most detail-packed half hour in the whole series, the episode that rewards a freeze frame more than any other, it is the one near the end of Book 3, where the group goes to the theater. It is called the Ember Island Players, and it is Avatar turning around and looking straight at itself, and almost every second of it is a joke aimed at something that happened earlier in the series. To get everything out of it, you basically have to have watched the whole show first, which is exactly the point. Here is the setup. On Ember Island, a Fire Nation vacation spot, there is a theater and a resident acting troupe, the Ember Island Players. I should flag that word resident because it matters and it is sometimes gotten wrong. These are not traveling performers wandering the countryside. They are the house company of the Ember Island Theater, based right there. And this same troupe has a history with the royal family because young Zuko was taken to see their productions as a boy by his mother Ursa, including their famously butchered version of a Fire Nation play. So when the group, hiding out in the Fire Nation, goes to see a show, they end up watching this local company perform a brand new production. and the production is a dramatization of the group's own adventures, the story of Aang and his friends up to that point. They sit in the audience and watch bad actors play warped versions of themselves. The playwright is named in the episode as Pew On Tim, and that is the first joke because it is a nod to the episode's actual real-world writer, a man named Tim Hedrick. The series credits its own writer inside the fiction as the hack who wrote this terrible play. And the in-universe playwright supposedly did his research by talking to, among others, singing nomads, pirates, prisoners of war, and, in a perfect little callback, a surprisingly knowledgeable merchant of cabbage. The Cabbage Man again, apparently now a consultant on musical theater. And then the parodies begin, and they are merciless, and every one of them is a specific comment on the series. The actor playing Aang is a grown woman, a running joke about Aang's youth and the way his voice and manner read, and the real Aang is mortified by it. The actor playing Toph is the best gag of all, a gigantic, muscle-bound man with a booming voice, the complete physical opposite of the tiny blind girl. And this enormous man performs Toph's earth sense by literally shouting so that sound waves bounce back to him and let him see. And the real Toph, far from being offended, absolutely loves it, because a giant, powerful man is exactly how she feels on the inside, and it is one of the warmest little character beats in the episode. The actor playing Zuko wanders around obsessing endlessly about his honor, a merciless jab at how much the real Zuko talked about honor in the early seasons, and the stage Zuko's hair keeps changing, which is a joke about how the real Zuko's hairstyle changed across the series as his character did. The actor playing Sokka, voiced by an actor known for playing a certain deadpan superhero, is written to make non-stop jokes about food and about being hungry, flattening the real Sokka down to his most surface-level running gag. The parody has teeth, though, and some of the jokes cut close to Avatar's real bruises. When the play reaches the death of Jet, a character who died earlier in Ba Sing Se under deliberately ambiguous circumstances, the play stages it with a piece of cardboard scenery slowly toppling over onto the actor, and a character remarks that it was all very unclear whether he actually died, which is a wink at the fact that the real Jet's death was left deliberately vague and off-screen. And when the play reaches the one episode of the series that fans famously dislike the most, a mid-book 2 detour about a canyon feud, the stage version simply has the characters decide not to bother with it, brushing it aside with a line about just wanting to keep flying and moving on. The show is making fun of its own weakest episode inside another episode. That is a level of self-awareness you almost never see. But the reason the episode is more than a comedy clip show, the reason it actually matters to the story is how it ends, and this is the part I think is genuinely clever. The play does not end the way the real series is going to end. In the play, the final act stages a version of the coming confrontation, and in that version, the heroes lose. Aang is struck down and killed. The Fire Lord triumphs, and the curtain falls on the villains standing victorious over the corpses of the good guys. The audience of Fire Nation citizens cheers, and our heroes sit there in the dark, having just watched a dramatization of their own deaths and the failure of everything they are fighting for, right before they have to go out and face the real thing. It is a gut punch dressed up as a comedy episode, a dark rehearsal of the worst-case ending, deliberately placed right before the finale to twist the knife and remind you that victory is not guaranteed. The Ember Island players spend an entire episode making you laugh at the series you love, and then, in the last few minutes, use that same play to make you truly afraid of how the story might turn out. It is the whole series in miniature, funny on the surface and serious all the way down, and it is stuffed with more small callbacks than any other single episode. If you ever want to test how closely you were paying attention across 3 seasons, that episode is the exam. Let us step outside the world of Avatar for a stretch and talk about the people who made it, because the voices coming out of these characters carry a whole layer of hidden connections most viewers never realize they are hearing. Avatar has one of the great voice casts in animation history, and some of the names attached to it are truly startling once you know them. Start at the top with the villain. The Fire Lord, Ozai, the cruel father at the dark center of the whole story, is voiced by Mark Hamill. Yes, that Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker himself, who over the decades became one of the best-loved voice actors alive, most famous for his definitive, cackling version of the Joker in Batman. So the tyrant burning down the world is played by the same man who is both the great hero of Star Wars and the great villain of Batman. And if Ozai's voice ever struck you as having a particular menacing, silken quality, that is why. It is a master of animated menace doing what he does best. Then there is Zuko, and Zuko's voice actor has one of the loveliest side stories in the whole cast. He is played by Dante Basco, and if you grew up in a certain era, you already know Dante Basco's face without knowing his name, because he played Rufio, the leader of the Lost Boys, in Steven Spielberg's Hook back in 1991. The kid with the wild red and black mohawk shouting, "Rufio, Rufio," that is Zuko. There is a whole generation that imprinted on Rufio as children and then years later imprinted on Zuko without realizing they were listening to the same performer growing up alongside them. And the connection deepens because when the sequel series came around set generations later, Dante Basco returned to voice a new character, a military officer who happens to be Zuko's own grandson. So Basco effectively plays his own grandchild, carrying the family's voice forward through the bloodline of the series itself. There is something fitting about that, the actor becoming a kind of ancestor. The widest-ranging performance in the whole show, though, belongs to a man whose voice you have heard constantly and whose face you would never recognize. And this is one of my favorite pieces of trivia about the entire production. The sky bison, Appa, and the winged lemur, Momo, and in fact, essentially every single animal noise in the entire series, every growl and chirp and grunt and roar from every hybrid creature we talked about earlier, all of it comes from one man, a voice actor named D. Bradley Baker. He is the sound of the whole animal kingdom of this world. One person is the entire menagerie. He is astonishingly good at it, and if you have ever felt that Appa and Momo were somehow more expressive and more alive than talking animals in most cartoons, it is because a single dedicated artist was doing all of it by mouth, treating a flying bison's grumble as a real performance. The same man, incidentally, is the voice of Perry the Platypus and countless other creatures across animation. He has made an entire career out of being every animal at once. There is a sadness folded into the voice cast too, and it is worth telling gently. Uncle Iroh in the first two books is voiced by a veteran actor named Mako, a distinguished performer with a long and respected career. And his warm, gravelly, deeply human Iroh is a performance many fans still count among the very finest in the series. But Mako died during the production of the series in the summer of 2006 before Book 3 was finished. He did not get to complete the role. The part was taken over for the final book by another actor, Greg Baldwin, who studied Mako's performance closely in order to honor it and match it as seamlessly as possible, so that Iroh's voice would carry through to the end without breaking the spell. And the show does something quietly moving to mark the loss. There is an episode in Book 2, a small, contained, almost plotless episode built entirely around Iroh, in which he honors the memory of his dead son, and at the end of that episode, the series places a simple dedication on screen in honor of Mako. The episode about a father grieving a lost son doubles as Avatar grieving a lost actor. It is one of the most tender things a production has ever done to say goodbye to one of its own. The cast holds a couple of true celebrity cameos hidden in plain hearing as well. In a Book 1 episode set at a prison, the warden of that prison is voiced by George Takei, Sulu from the original Star Trek, another instantly recognizable voice to anyone who grew up on that show. And later in Book 3, a small but important role, a kind prison guard named Ming who shows compassion to Iroh, is voiced by the tennis champion Serena Williams, of all people, one of the greatest athletes of her generation, taking a quiet turn as a gentle background character. You could watch the whole show a dozen times and never know she was in it. And then there is where all of this came from in the first place, the origin of the entire show, which is charming enough that it deserves telling. The two creators, Michael Dante DiMartino and Brian Konietzko, met as students at the Rhode Island School of Design, and the seed of Avatar came, the story goes, from a single drawing. Konietzko took an old sketch he had of a balding, middle-aged man and, on a whim, reimagined him as a young child, a bald little boy, and drew that child herding bison through the sky. That image, a kid with a flying herd, was the spark that became Aang, the whole vast machine we have been talking about all night, the calligraphy and the martial arts and the reincarnation cosmology. All of it grew from one doodle of a child in the clouds. And the series itself was animated not in America, but in South Korea, by several Korean animation studios working under the Nickelodeon banner, which is part of why the action has that particular fluid, film quality movement that set it so far apart from other American television cartoons of its era. It looked like nothing else on Saturday morning because it was made, in large part, by studios steeped in a different and more cinematic animation tradition. And the industry noticed because this supposed kids' cartoon went on to win a Primetime Emmy, a shelf of Annie Awards, and even a Peabody Award, which is an honor for excellence in broadcasting that cartoons almost never receive. The industry itself came around to the idea that this was something more than a children's show, even as it was still airing as one. Before the series you know existed, there was a version of it that almost nobody has seen, and it is full of tiny differences that would have changed the whole feel of the thing. Every series makes an unaired pilot, a first rough attempt used to sell the show, and Avatar's pilot has become one of the more fascinating artifacts in the fandom because it shows you the road not taken. The pilot is recognizably Avatar but off, the way a dream version of something familiar is off. The biggest difference is Aang's voice. In the pilot, Aang is not voiced by the young actor who plays him in the series. He is voiced by Mitchell Musso, who would later become famous as a child star on the Disney Channel, on Hannah Montana. So there is a whole alternate Aang out there with a completely different voice, a version of the character that never made it to air. The strangest change, though, is a name. And it is a name that ended up mattering enormously later. In the pilot, the character we know as Katara is not called Katara. She is called Kaya. And if that name rings a bell for anyone who has seen the whole series, it should, because Kaya is the name that the series later gives to Katara's mother, the mother who was killed in a Fire Nation raid when Katara was a little girl, whose loss shapes so much of who Katara becomes. The creators took the heroine's discarded original name and gave it instead to her dead mother, so that the name lives on in the story as a ghost, a small piece of the abandoned first draft folded back into the finished world as an act of memory. I find that a lovely, sad little touch that a leftover from the pilot became the name of the character's greatest grief. And there is a third change that tells you how much Avatar grew in the writing. In the pilot, Zuko does not travel with his wise uncle Iroh. Iroh, as we know him, the tea-drinking, proverb-dispensing heart of the whole series, was not there yet. Instead, Zuko keeps company with a messenger hawk, a pet bird, and nothing more. The gentle heart of the entire series, the character so many viewers point to as the soul of Avatar, did not exist in the first attempt. He was added later in the development when the writers realized that Zuko needed a counterweight, someone gentle to sit beside all that fury and slowly, patiently love him back toward the light. Imagine the series without Iroh. The pilot is a window into exactly that, a colder, thinner version of the story. And it makes you appreciate how many of Avatar's best decisions were not there from the start, but were found along the way. There's a whole category of these small growths and jokes buried in the finished series, little grace notes that only pay off if you happen to be watching closely. Take a bit of slang. In Book 3, Hiding in the Fire Nation, Aang tries to blend in by using what he thinks is cool Fire Nation slang, a greeting, Flameo, hot man. He says it earnestly, proud of himself, and the actual Fire Nation kids around him have no idea what he's talking about, because it is not real slang, it is nonsense. And Aang looks ridiculous. That is funny on its own. But the companion material around the show later adds a layer that makes it a little heartbreaking. The idea that this phrase was coined 100 years earlier by Aang's own guardian, the monk Gyatso, as an old joke poking fun at the Fire Nation. So Aang is not just using outdated slang. He is earnestly reviving a private joke made by the murdered father figure of his lost people, a scrap of a dead man's humor carried a century forward by the one boy who remembers him, and used with total sincerity in front of kids who could never understand where it came from. A silly throwaway gag turns out to be a small monument to a vanished world if you know its history. Something worth noticing across the whole series is how carefully the series tracks its own technology. Because Avatar is a story about a world tipping over the edge into industrial war, and it plants the machines before it uses them. There is a character called the Mechanist, an inventor living at a northern air temple, a nervous, brilliant man whose gadgets are scattered all through his workshop. If you look at the background of his home in Book 1, at the schematics pinned to his walls and the half-built devices lying around, you can spot the seeds of things that come back to hurt people later. The technology that the Fire Nation eventually turns into weapons of conquest is often previewed, in a gentler form, in the hands of a tinkerer who only wanted to make life easier. The war does not invent its machines out of nowhere. It takes the fruits of clever, well-meaning invention and bends them toward destruction. And Avatar shows you the invention first so that the weaponization lands as a kind of corruption. The clearest example is the Great Drill. In Book 2, the Fire Nation assaults the outer wall of Ba Sing Se with an enormous mechanical drill, a monstrous engine built to grind straight through the one defense the Earth Kingdom trusted above all others. It is a genuine set piece, this huge machine chewing into the wall, and its lineage traces back to that same spirit of invention we met earlier. The schematics and the mechanical dreaming that, in kinder hands, were just clever tools. The series is arguing something about progress here, that technology itself is neutral, that the same ingenuity can dig a well or breach a wall, and that what matters is the heart of the nation wielding it. The Fire Nation is the industrial power, the one with the factories and the engines and the war balloons, and its machines are always pointed outward at everyone else. That is not decoration. It is the whole political shape of the world, rendered in gears and steam. And then there is the assassin, and he is a walking piece of foreshadowing wrapped around his own doom. In Book 3, Zuko, before he fully turns, hires a silent, hulking killer to hunt down Aang and the group. The fans nicknamed him the Combustion Man because his power is unique and terrifying. He is a firebender who can create explosions at a distance, launching a beam of concussive force from a third eye tattooed on his forehead. He does not throw fire with his hands like other firebenders. He focuses this destructive energy through the tattoo on his brow and detonates things far away, which makes him almost impossible to fight because he can blow you apart before you ever get close. He is one of the scariest antagonists in the series, precisely because his power outranges everyone. But the series plays fair, and it shows you his weakness before it uses it if you are watching his fights closely. His entire power runs through that third eye on his forehead. It is the aperture, the barrel of the gun. And that means it is also the flaw, because if that third eye is disrupted at the wrong moment, the explosion has nowhere to go but back into him. The payoff is one of the more satisfying uses of an established object in the whole series. Sokka, who is not a bender, who spends the entire show being the ordinary guy surrounded by people with superpowers, has one signature possession, his boomerang, a weapon established from the very first episode, a thing that always comes back to him. And in the confrontation with the Combustion Man at the crucial moment, it is Sokka's boomerang, thrown with perfect timing, that strikes the assassin's third eye just as he is charging a blast. The energy backfires, and the man who could blow apart anything at a distance is destroyed by his own power, undone by the one small handmade weapon carried by the one member of the group with no powers at all. The setup, the weakness of the third eye, the reliability of the boomerang, all of it was laid down in advance, and it pays off in a single perfect throw. The regular guy and his stick beat the unstoppable superweapon, and the show earned every frame of it. Sokka is worth lingering on for a moment because he carries a lot of these small, satisfying details, the rewards the series gives to the character who has no bending to lean on. Later in the series, he acquires a sword, and the metal for that sword comes from a meteorite that falls from the sky, so his blade is literally forged from a piece of a fallen star, black metal from beyond the world. And he is trained in the art of the blade by Piandao, the retired master we mentioned earlier, the swordsman who was written as a tribute to Avatar's own martial arts consultant. So the one non-bender in the group ends up with a star metal sword and a secret master and a boomerang that kills a superhuman assassin, which is the show's way of insisting that ordinary human skill, cleverness, craft, and courage matters just as much as elemental magic. Sokka never bends a single thing across 61 episodes, and he is arguably the reason the group survives half of what it survives. The series buries that argument in props, a boomerang, a meteorite, a borrowed sword, and lets you assemble it yourself. Toph deserves a stretch of her own because she is stuffed with these hidden details, and a few of them reach back before she ever appears on screen. Here is one that delights people who go back and rewatch from the beginning. Toph does not join the group until Book 2. She is not in Book 1 at all, not a single scene. And yet, if you look carefully at the opening title sequence of Book 1, the montage of images that plays before certain episodes, there is a brief shot of an earthbender, and fans have long pointed to it as an early glimpse of Toph, or at least a placeholder for the earthbending master the group was always destined to find. The show knew from the start that an Earth teacher was coming and left a little trace of that future in the credits of a season she is not in. There is a deeper piece of development trivia underneath Toph too, and it changed the whole texture of the group for the better. In the early planning of the series, the earthbending master that Aang would need to learn from was conceived very differently. Imagined at one point as a large, older, muscular man, a much more conventional idea of what a tough, earthbending Sifu should look like. The creators reworked that entirely and turned the character into a tiny 12-year-old blind girl, and Avatar is immeasurably richer for it. That original muscular man concept did not vanish, though. It came back transformed into a joke, as the giant muscle-bound actor who plays Toph in that theater episode we talked about, the enormous man booming Toph's lines. So the huge male earthbender who was almost the real Toph survives in the finished series as a gag about how absurd it would be for Toph to be a huge male earthbender. The abandoned first idea got to take a bow. And then there is the poster, which is one of the more charming little arcs in Book 3. As the group travels through the Fire Nation, they need money. And Toph, being Toph, starts running scams, hustling people with her earthbending and her fake helplessness. And she becomes so notorious that the authorities put out a wanted poster for her. The poster gives her a nickname, the Runaway, and when Sokka finds it, he is horrified. But Toph is thrilled. She loves it. She loves having a criminal alias, loves being infamous, loves the proof that she has made a name for herself entirely separate from her family, the family that treated her as a fragile, helpless little girl who needed to be hidden away. The Runaway poster is not just a gag. For Toph, it is a trophy, evidence that the world sees her as dangerous and capable, which is exactly the opposite of how her overprotective parents saw her. But here's where the series ties the knot, because that same fame becomes a danger. The wanted poster and the reckless scamming behind it is part of what puts the group on the map, part of what draws the attention of the very assassin we just discussed. The thing Toph is proudest of becomes a thread the enemy can pull. Her rebellion, her insistence on being seen as strong, has a cost, and the series lets both truths stand at once, that her pride is earned and that her pride is dangerous. What I love about Toph in general is that the show never once lets her blindness be a source of pity, and it hides the mechanics of that everywhere in the details. She sees through vibrations in the earth, feeling the world through her feet, which is why she hates flying on Appa, because up in the air she is truly blind, cut off from the ground that is her only way of seeing. It is why she prefers to go barefoot and complains bitterly whenever she is forced onto sand, which scatters her sense, or onto wooden floors, which deaden it. The series works out the full logic of her perception and then honors it consistently, so that her strengths and her few genuine vulnerabilities both flow from the same single idea. She is the greatest earthbender in the world, and she cannot read a wanted poster with her own face on it, and Avatar holds those two facts together without ever making the second one sad. When Toph needs to know what a piece of writing says, she just asks without embarrassment because she has never once believed that her blindness makes her less. That confidence is written into every choice around her, right down to which surfaces the animators put under her feet. Now let us go back, further back than the series usually takes you, to the origin of the whole war, because the series eventually reveals that the 100 years of suffering all grew out of a friendship. This is the story of Roku and Sozin, and it recontextualizes everything. And the series waits until deep into Book 3 to hand it to you in an episode where Aang finally learns the full truth from Roku himself. Roku was the Avatar immediately before Aang, a Fire Nation man, and in his youth his closest friend in the world was a fellow Fire Nation boy named Sozin. They grew up together, two young men who loved each other like brothers, and there is a detail the show gives you that makes the whole thing land harder, which is that they shared a birthday. They were born on the same day, best friends, born on the same day, closer than brothers. And on the day they both come of age, Roku learns that he is the Avatar, and Sozin is the first person to stand by him. When Roku goes off to master the 4 elements and Sozin becomes the Fire Lord, there is even a moment where Sozin offers Roku a gift, a piece of Fire Nation royalty. and their friendship seems unbreakable. Sozin is even there at Roku's wedding. These are not enemies. These are two men who love each other and who are, without either of them fully seeing it yet, being pulled toward opposite sides of a coming catastrophe. The break comes over an idea. Sozin, as Fire Lord, becomes convinced that the Fire Nation has grown so prosperous and so advanced that it has a kind of duty to share its greatness with the rest of the world, to spread its prosperity to the other nations whether they want it or not. It is the logic of empire dressed up as generosity, and Roku sees straight through it. When Sozin begins to build the beginnings of a colonial expansion, Roku confronts him and stops him. And in that confrontation, Avatar against Fire Lord, old friend against old friend, Roku wins, and he warns Sozin that if he ever tries it again, Roku will end him. And then, crucially, Roku spares him. He does not kill his friend. He walks away, trusting that the warning is enough, that the bond between them still means something. That mercy is the hinge on which the entire tragedy turns. Because years later, Roku is dying, a volcano erupts near his home, a catastrophe beyond even the Avatar's power to fully contain, and Roku is overwhelmed by the smoke and the ash, brought to his knees by the poison in the air. And Sozin comes. Sozin arrives, flying in, and for one moment it looks like the old friendship will save him because Sozin uses his firebending to help hold back some of the volcano's fury. And he reaches out and their hands clasp, two old men, best friends, born on the same day, together again at the end. And then Sozin makes his choice. He looks at his dying friend and he calculates. He realizes that with Roku gone, the Avatar will be reborn as an air nomad, a child, someone he can find and eliminate before a new Avatar can ever grow strong enough to stop him. And so Sozin lets go. He abandons Roku, leaves him there in the ash and the fumes to die, and flies away to begin planning the end of the world. Roku does not die in a duel. He is not struck down by an enemy. He is left to suffocate by the person he loved most, who chose ambition over the oldest bond he had. I think that is one of the darkest things this show ever does, and it does it to two old men holding hands. And here's the piece that connects it all to the series you have been watching from the start. After Roku dies, the Avatar is reborn as Aang, and Sozin spends the rest of his life hunting for the new Avatar and preparing his great strike. He waits for a comet that passes only once a century and floods every firebender with overwhelming power. When it comes, Sozin uses that borrowed power to launch the surprise attack that begins the 100-Year War, and to carry out the annihilation of the air nomads, hoping to kill the reborn Avatar among them. And that comet, the one that returns in the final season as the ticking clock of the whole finale, is named after him. It is called Sozin's Comet. The instrument of the genocide and the deadline of the last battle both carry the name of the man who abandoned his best friend to die. Every time a character in Book 3 says the word Sozin's Comet with dread, they are invoking, without knowing it, a broken friendship a century old. The war has a personal origin. It did not start with nations. It started with two boys who shared a birthday, and one of them who could not let his friend be greater than himself. There is one more thread that ties this ancient story directly into the royal family we discussed earlier, and it is the kind of detail that makes the whole world feel like one closed circle. Roku had a family, descendants who carried his blood down the generations. And through a line the series reveals late, it turns out that Roku is the great-grandfather of Zuko. Zuko, the banished Fire Nation prince chasing the Avatar, is himself descended from an Avatar, from Roku, the friend Sozin betrayed. So the blood of the Avatar Roku and the blood of the Fire Lord Sozin both run through the same royal family, both flow into Zuko, and his lifelong struggle between honor and cruelty, between his gentle side and his father's legacy, is in a very literal sense a war between two ancestors fought inside one boy. The friendship that started the war and the ambition that fueled it are both, generations later, arguing with each other in the heart of a teenager, trying to decide what kind of man he wants to be. Avatar never spells that out as neatly as I just did. It simply lays the pieces down, the birthday, the mercy, the abandoned friend, the shared bloodline, and trusts that if you have been watching closely, you will feel the whole shape of it close around you like a hand. If the war has a human heart, the world also has a stranger one, an older layer underneath the politics, and that is the spirit world. which the series treats with a seriousness that surprises people who remember Avatar mainly as an action comedy. The spirits are not cute mascots. They are ancient, powerful, and governed by rules that have nothing to do with human wishes, and some of them are properly frightening. The series never lets you forget that the Avatar is not only a warrior, but a bridge between two worlds, and the spirit world has its own logic that does not bend for anyone. The single scariest spirit in the whole series is a creature called Ko, the Face Stealer. Aang has to visit him, and the encounter is one of the tensest, most unsettling scenes the show ever stages because of the rule attached to him. Ko is an enormous centipede-like being whose body is ringed with the stolen faces of everyone he has ever taken. And he takes a face the instant its owner shows any expression at all in his presence. To survive a conversation with Ko, you must keep your face completely blank. No fear, no surprise, no anger, nothing, no matter what he says or does or which face he suddenly wears to rattle you. If your expression flickers even once, he takes your face and adds it to his collection, and you are lost. So the series stages an entire dialogue in which Aang, a child, has to hold a perfectly empty expression, while a monster wearing stolen faces circles him and tries to provoke a reaction. It is a horror movie premise dropped into a kid's cartoon, and it works because the rule is absolute and Avatar honors it completely. And Ko has history, which the series only hints at. He has crossed paths with past avatars, and he carries old grudges from those encounters. There is a thread involving a past avatar's lost love, a woman whose face Ko took, tangled up in the failures of an avatar who came generations before Aang. The series does not spell all of it out on screen, and some of the deeper details around Ko live more in the extended lore than in the episodes themselves, so I will not overstate what the series actually shows you. But even the fragment you get is enough to make Ko feel ancient and personal and dangerous, a being who has been collecting faces for longer than the war has existed and who remembers every avatar who ever wronged him. Then there is the Keeper of Knowledge, and his story is a small tragedy about curiosity and its misuse. Out in the great desert, there is a vast spirit library, an enormous building full of all the knowledge in the world, presided over by an enormous owl spirit named Wan Shi Tong, whose name means he who knows 10,000 things. He allows mortals to enter and read, but on one condition, that they come humbly, to learn for the sake of learning and not to use his knowledge as a weapon. And the group, needing information to win the war, breaks that trust. In particular, the Admiral Zhao earlier had used the library to find a piece of forbidden knowledge, the secret of how to strike at the moon spirit itself, information he could only have gotten from that library. When the owl realizes that humans keep coming to his library not to understand the world but to gain advantage in their endless wars, he is disgusted, and he passes judgment, and he sinks the entire library down into the sand with the intruders still inside, choosing to remove all that knowledge from a world that would only abuse it. The spirit of knowledge decides that humanity has not earned what he guards, and he takes it away. It is a chilling little parable, and it is the kind of thing the series slips in without ever pausing to underline the moral. Not all the spirits are frightening, though, and one of the gentlest threads in the show is about a spirit who is simply grieving. Early on, Aang encounters a forest spirit called Hei Bai, who appears as a rampaging monster destroying a village, and everyone assumes it is evil and needs to be fought. But Aang, in his role as the bridge, comes to understand that Hei Bai is not evil at all. The spirit is in agony because its forest, its home, has been burned down by the Fire Nation, and its rage is grief, the thrashing of something that has lost everything it was meant to protect. Once Aang shows the spirit that the forest will grow back, that its acorns still hold the promise of the trees to come, Hei Bai calms and returns to its gentle form, and even returns the villagers it had taken. The lesson is one the series keeps teaching in different keys, that what looks like monstrous anger is very often unbearable loss, and that the answer is not to fight it, but to understand it. It is the same lesson in miniature that the whole series eventually applies to Zuko, and even, in its sadder way, to Azula. And the spirits are not distant. They notice when a human acts in their spirit, so to speak. There is an episode where Katara disguises herself as a local river spirit, the Painted Lady. in order to help a poisoned, suffering village that the Fire Nation has been slowly killing with its factory. She is not really the spirit, she is just a girl in a costume doing good under a borrowed name. But at the end, after the village is saved, the real painted lady appears to Katara silently and thanks her for what she did in her name. The actual spirit was real all along, and it saw a mortal girl take up its identity to protect the people it could no longer protect, and it came to offer its quiet gratitude. It is a small grace note that tells you the spirit world is not just a set of dangers to be survived. It is watching, and sometimes when a human does the work a spirit can no longer do, it is grateful. The two spirits that matter most to the plot, though, are the moon and the ocean, and their story pays off one of Avatar's most careful pieces of setup, a detail planted in the color of a girl's hair. To understand it, you have to go to the North Pole, to the end of Book 1, where the two oldest spirits still live among mortals in a hidden oasis. In the heart of the Northern Water Tribe, in a warm spring shielded from the ice, there swim two koi fish, one white and one black, circling each other endlessly in the classic shape of balance, light and dark chasing each other's tails. These are not ordinary fish. They are the physical forms of Tui and La, the moon spirit and the ocean spirit, the two beings who first taught humans to waterbend by showing them how the moon pushes and pulls the tides. Waterbending exists because the moon exists. The power over water is borrowed, in the deepest sense, from the moon that moves the sea, which is why waterbenders are strongest at night under a full moon and weakest when the moon is gone. The whole art rests on those two fish circling in a pond, and almost nobody in the tribe treats them as anything other than a sacred curiosity. Now bring in the princess. Yue is the princess of the Northern Water Tribe, a gentle young woman with a striking, unusual feature, hair as white as snow, which no one else in the tribe has. And her white hair is not a random design choice. It is a clue, planted at the start of her story and paid off at the end. Yue tells the group that when she was born, she was sickly and weak, near death as an infant, and that her desperate parents carried her to the sacred oasis and prayed to the moon spirit for help. And the moon spirit gave a piece of its own life to the dying baby, saving her. And in that moment, her dark hair turned white, marked forever by the touch of the moon that had literally given her its life force. She has carried a fragment of the moon spirit inside her since infancy, and her white hair is the visible sign of it. The series tells you this softly as a sad and tender bit of backstory, and most viewers file it away as a nice detail. It is not just a nice detail. It is a loaded gun on the mantelpiece, and it goes off in the finale. Because at the climax of the Siege of the North, the Admiral Zhao, armed with the forbidden knowledge he stole from the Spirit Library, does the unthinkable. He finds the sacred oasis, and he attacks the moon spirit directly, pulling the white koi from the water and, in an act of almost cosmic vandalism, killing it. And the instant he does, the world changes. The moon goes dark, the sky turns a sick red, and all across the North Pole, every waterbender loses their power at once, because the source of waterbending has just been murdered by a man who wanted to win a battle. It is one of the starkest images in the whole show, the moon simply going out, and the entire art of an entire people going out with it. Balance itself has been broken by a single act of ambition. And this is where Yue's whole life comes due. The moon spirit is dying, and with it the balance of the world, and there is only one way to restore it, because a piece of the moon spirit's life is still alive, walking around in a girl who is given that life as a baby. Yue understands what she has to do. She gives it back. She returns the life the moon once gave her, offering herself so that the moon spirit can live again. And in doing so, she becomes the moon spirit, her body going still as her spirit rises to take its place in the sky. The princess with the white hair becomes the moon. The detail planted at the very beginning of her arc, the sickly infant saved by the moon, the hair turned white, was always the mechanism of her ending. She could give the moon its life back precisely because the moon had once given its life to her. It is a complete circle, set up an entire book in advance, and it turns a princess into a god and a piece of set decoration, two fish in a pond, into the emotional climax of the entire first season. When you rewatch it knowing how it ends, every mention of Yue's white hair rings like a bell tolling for something that has not happened yet. There is a grim little coda to that battle too, and it reaches all the way into the sequel series if you know to look. Zhao, having murdered the moon, does not get away with it. As the balance is restored, the ocean spirit, the Black Koi's counterpart, rises up in a towering, vengeful form and takes Zhao, dragging him down into the water in front of Zuko, who, in a last flash of decency, actually tries to save the life of the man who had been his rival. Zhao refuses the hand and is pulled under, and for years everyone assumed that was simply his death. But the later series reveals something colder. Zhao did not die and find peace. He was taken into a spirit prison, a place called the Fog of Lost Souls, where he has been wandering, trapped, and slowly losing his mind for decades, still muttering about the moon. The man who killed the moon spirit was not granted the mercy of death. He was given a much longer sentence, lost in the fog, and the series that seemed to close his story simply left him there in the dark, waiting to be found again. Underneath all the plot and all the spectacle, the show has a spine, a single idea it keeps returning to in different disguises, and if you missed it the first time, it is because the series never once lectures you about it. The idea is letting go, and it is dramatized most fully in an episode that a lot of first-time viewers find slow, an episode about a guru and a set of energy centers in the body called chakras. It is worth slowing down for because it is the philosophical key to the entire series. In Book 2, Aang goes to a wise old man named Guru Pathak, who offers to teach him to control the avatar state, the fearsome power we talked about earlier, the flood of all his past lives. Pathak explains that the avatar state is blocked by a series of energy centers running up the body, 7 of them, and that each one is clogged by a particular fear or attachment, and that to open them, to gain full mastery of his power, Aang has to work through each one in turn, confronting and releasing what blocks it. He has to let go of guilt, of shame, of grief, of fear, one after another, opening each center by facing the pain it holds. And it is going beautifully, Aang working his way up through his own wounds until he reaches the last one. The final center is about pure cosmic energy, about connection to everything, and to open it, Pathak tells Aang he must let go of his earthly attachments, the specific personal loves that tie him to the world, so that his spirit can flow freely into the universal. And for Aang, that means one person. It means Katara. To open the last chakra and gain complete control of the avatar state, Aang is asked to let go of his attachment to Katara, to release the one love that anchors him. And Aang cannot do it. He tries, he reaches the vision of her, and he simply will not give her up. He chooses his love for one person over ultimate power. And in doing so, he leaves the final gate locked. He walks away from mastery of the avatar state because he refuses to stop loving the girl he loves. Now here is why that matters so much, and why Avatar placed it exactly where it did. It happens right before the disaster in Ba Sing Se. Right before the Crystal Catacombs, right before the moment we discussed where Azula's lightning strikes Aang in the back and stops his heart. And the reason that lightning is so catastrophic, the reason it can very nearly end the entire Avatar cycle forever, is precisely that the last chakra is still locked. Aang tries to raise himself into the Avatar state to defend himself, the state that would have made him untouchable, and because he never released that final attachment, he cannot fully enter it, and he is vulnerable in the exact instant he most needs to be invincible. His love for Katara is the thing that leaves him open to the blow that kills him. The philosophy and the plot are the same event. The choice he made on the mountain, love over power, is what nearly costs him everything in the city. And the series handles that with real subtlety because it never actually tells you Aang was wrong. It would have been easy to write a simple lesson, that attachment is weakness, that he should have let go, that his love for Katara was a flaw. That is not what the series argues. Aang's refusal to give up Katara is presented as deeply human and deeply right, even though it carries a terrible cost. The series sits in the tension and refuses to resolve it into a tidy moral. Letting go in Avatar does not mean not loving. The air nomads, remember, were the culture of detachment, and the tragedy is that Aang is the last of them, raised on a philosophy of releasing attachment, and yet the whole story hinges on the one attachment he cannot and should not release. The resolution the show eventually reaches, much later, is subtler than the Guru's version. It is that you can be at peace and still love, that letting go of your fear and your guilt is not the same as letting go of the people you love, and that a healthy spirit holds on to love while releasing everything that poisons it. Aang has to find a way to be both an air nomad and a boy in love, and the series treats that reconciliation as the real work of growing up. That is the secret argument running under all the bending and all the battles. Almost every major character is struggling with the same knot in a different form. Zuko has to let go of his need for his father's approval before he can become himself. Iroh has to let go of his dead son enough to keep living and to love his nephew like a son. Katara has to let go of her rage at the man who killed her mother, in an episode that deliberately refuses to give her the clean revenge the audience half expects. Azula cannot let go of anything, cannot release her need for control or her wound about her mother, and it destroys her. The series is, underneath everything, a long meditation on what to hold and what to release, and it hides that meditation inside a story about a boy who can control the wind. If you only ever noticed the fights, you still absorb the lesson because Avatar built the lesson into the shape of the fights themselves. Now I want to spend some time being precise about the deaths and the dark facts of the series, because these are exactly the details people misremember, and getting them right is the whole reason a video like this exists. The series is careful about how its people die, careful in ways that are easy to blur in memory, and the truth is almost always sadder and stranger than the version we half remember. Start with the largest wound in the whole story, the genocide of the air nomads, because this is the one most often told wrong, and the accurate version matters. It is tempting to imagine that Aang, our airbending hero, somehow witnessed the destruction of his people, that he was there for it, that he carries the trauma of having seen his whole culture burn. He did not, and he was not. What actually happened is that Aang, as a boy, overwhelmed and frightened by the weight of being told he was the Avatar, and by a decision that would separate him from his guardian, ran away from the Southern Air Temple. He fled on Appa, and in a storm over the ocean, he was knocked into the freezing water, and in a burst of instinct, his own power activated the Avatar state to protect him, freezing him and Appa inside a globe of ice, suspended, alive but unconscious, at the bottom of the sea. And it was while he was frozen in that iceberg, unaware, that Sazan's comet came and the Fire Nation carried out the annihilation of the air nomads. Aang was not present. He was already gone, sealed in the ice, sleeping through the end of his world. He did not see it happen. He learned about it 100 years later, after Katara and Sokka freed him, when the war was already ancient history to everyone but him. And the way he learns is one of the more devastating sequences in the entire series, and the accuracy of it matters because a small detail makes all the difference. Early in Book 1, Aang returns to his childhood home, the Southern Air Temple, still not fully believing that anything is wrong, still hoping to find his people and his guardian, the monk Gyatso, waiting for him. And he does find Gyatso. He finds his remains, the skeleton of the old monk who raised him, surrounded by the armor of the Fire Nation soldiers he fought as he died defending the temple. That is the moment the truth becomes real. The moment a boy understands that 100 years have passed and everyone he loved is dead and his entire people were murdered while he slept. It is unbearable, and the series does not flinch from it. And the detail that speaks to what the series is really about is that Aang is not alone when it happens. Katara is there. She has followed him, and when the grief overwhelms him and his power begins to spiral out into the Avatar state from the sheer force of his pain, it is Katara who reaches him, who steps into the storm of it, and tells him that she and Sokka are his family now, that he is not alone anymore. The show does not let him face the worst moment of his life by himself. From almost the very beginning, its answer to unbearable loss is the same, that you survive it through the people who choose to stand beside you. Aang lost one family in the ice, and he woke to find another one waiting. Then there is Lu Ten, whose death you never see but whose absence shapes half the story. Lu Ten was Iroh's only son, and Iroh, before the events of the series, was not the gentle tea drinker we meet. He was the greatest general of the Fire Nation, the Dragon of the West, laying siege to Ba Sing Se on the very edge of taking the impenetrable city. And during that siege, his son Lu Ten was killed. We are never shown it. We simply learn that the boy died and that his death broke Iroh completely, that the general abandoned the siege and walked away from the war and from his ambitions, a hollowed-out man, and that single death changed the succession of the entire Fire Nation. Because with Iroh's heir dead and Iroh himself shattered and withdrawn, the path to the throne opened for his younger brother Ozai, who seized the moment to have himself named heir over the grieving Iroh. Every cruelty Ozai and Azula inflict across the whole series traces back, in part, to a young man dying off-screen at a siege, a death that emptied out the one good man who might have inherited the throne and left it to the cruelest one instead. The series builds an entire dynasty of pain on a loss it never even shows you. Jet is another death Avatar handles with deliberate ambiguity, and it is a choice worth admiring. Jet is a charismatic, dangerous young freedom fighter, and late in Book 2, in the tunnels under Ba Sing Se, he is mortally wounded by the earthbending of the city's secret police chief. And here the series takes a bold risk. It does not show you Jet die. Instead, his friends insist he will be fine, that they will take care of him, and Jet himself tells the group to go on without him. And it is Toph, who can feel heartbeats and detect lies through the ground, who tells the others the truth. When someone claims Jet will be all right, Toph simply says he is lying. That is how you learn Jet dies, not from a body, not from a death scene, but from the blind girl's lie detector confirming that the reassurances are false. The series trusts you to understand what that means, and it lets the ambiguity sit there, which is somehow heavier than showing the death outright would have been. It became one of the small, legendary moments of the series precisely because of what it refuses to show. And then the villains, whose ends are more precise than people remember. Roku, as we traced earlier, was not killed in a duel by an enemy, but abandoned to a volcano by his oldest friend, so I will not walk through that again. The Admiral Zhao likewise was taken by the ocean spirit, and as we said, did not simply die but was lost to a spirit prison. But the two at the very top of the story, Ozai and Azula, have endings that are widely misremembered, and the precise versions are far more interesting. Ozai, the Fire Lord, the Phoenix King, is not killed. Aang, holding to everything his people believed, refuses to take his life, and instead uses the ancient energy bending to strip Ozai of his firebending forever, leaving him alive but powerless, a defeated tyrant with no fire left, imprisoned for the rest of his days. He still calls himself the Phoenix King in his cell, clinging to a grand title that now means nothing at all. A powerless man in a cage insisting he is a god. It is a fate arguably crueler than death for a man like him, to lose the one thing that ever made him powerful, and to have to go on living as an ordinary prisoner. And Azula, crucially, does not end up in a prison at all, which people frequently get wrong. Azula's ending is a mental collapse. Over the final stretch of the series, she unravels completely, the perfectionist princess coming apart as everyone she trusted abandons or betrays her, until by the final confrontation she is paranoid, hallucinating, and barely holding herself together. In the last Agni Kai, she is defeated not by strength alone, but because she is no longer sane, and she is subdued and restrained, and where she ends is not a cell beside her father. She is committed to an institution, a place for the mentally ill, chained and weeping and broken. The show makes a careful distinction between the two. Ozai is a monster who is punished. Azula is a casualty who is, in the end, more pitied than hated. A young woman who was engineered into a weapon and then shattered when the machine of her life fell apart. The last real image the series gives you of her is not a villain in chains gloating. It is a girl crying, alone, having lost everything, including her mind. That is a very deliberate choice, and it is the series insisting, one last time, that you understand the difference between evil and damage. Let us come back to Zuko because he is the character Avatar invested more craft in than any other, and there are threads in his story that reward a second look more than almost anything else in the series. The best known is the mask. For a stretch of Book 1, there is a mysterious masked vigilante called the Blue Spirit, a silent, blue-masked, dual sword-wielding figure who appears to break the Avatar out of a Fire Nation stronghold, fighting his way through soldiers without a word. And the reveal, when it comes, is that the Blue Spirit is Zuko, the prince who has spent every waking hour hunting Aang to capture him and drag him to his father, secretly puts on a mask and rescues that same boy. because at that moment a rival, the Admiral Zhao, has captured Aang, and Zuko would rather free his prey and keep the hunt for himself than let anyone else claim the prize. But watch what the series is doing underneath that plot logic. The mask lets Zuko do something his identity as the Fire Nation prince never could, which is act even briefly on the same side as Aang, to work to free him rather than cage him. He tells himself it is about the hunt. But the blue spirit is the first crack of light through Zuko's armor, the first time we see that this angry boy is capable of saving the Avatar rather than destroying him, and he can only do it while hidden behind a mask, while pretending to be someone else, because he is not yet able to be that person openly. The disguise is not just a plot device. It is a picture of a young man who has to hide his own better nature even from himself. Years of story later, when Zuko finally switches sides for real, in the open, without a mask, you can look back and see that the blue spirit was the very first version of that choice, made in secret before he could admit to wanting it. And there is a small, sweet echo of this because the mask itself is styled after a character from Fire Nation theater, from the kind of play we saw at Ember Island, so even Zuko's secret identity is drawn from the culture that shaped him. And you cannot talk about Zuko without talking about the man who saved him, because Iroh is the quiet engine of the whole redemption, and the series hides its deepest wisdom in his smallest moments. Iroh almost never gives Zuko a grand lecture. Instead, he offers tea and proverbs and patience, and he waits for years through Zuko's rage and his betrayals, never giving up on him. There's a stretch in Book 2 where the two of them are refugees, fugitives from their own nation, and they end up settling in Ba Sing Se, where Iroh does the one perfectly Iroh thing imaginable. He opens a tea shop. This man who was once the greatest general in the world, the Dragon of the West, the heir to the throne, finds his truest happiness serving tea to strangers and is utterly, completely content doing it. His skill is so admired that he is eventually given his own grand tea house, the Jasmine Dragon. One of the finest firebenders of his generation wants nothing more than to make people a good cup of tea, and the show presents that not as a come-down but as wisdom, as a man who has seen through ambition to what actually matters. Iroh lost his son and his throne and his nation, and what he chose to become was kind. That is the model held up against Ozai's cruelty, against Azula's hunger, a man who had every reason to be bitter and chose, instead, tea and patience and love. There is a detail about Iroh that ties back to something we discussed near the start, the way the series honored the actor who first gave him voice. That small, contained Book 2 episode built entirely around Iroh, the one where he spends a day preparing a simple meal, singing to himself, showing kindness to strangers, and finally revealing that it is the anniversary of his dead son's birthday, and he weeps and speaks to Lu Ten as though he can hear him, is regarded by many as the finest single half-hour Avatar ever produced. It has almost no plot. It is just a good man missing his boy. And placing at the end of that episode the dedication to the actor who had died during production turned the whole thing into a double elegy, a character grieving his son and a show grieving its friend, folded into the same 22 minutes. It is the sort of thing you only fully feel on a rewatch when you know the story behind the story, and it is a large part of why people who grew up with this show carry Iroh around with them for the rest of their lives. The relationship between Zuko and Iroh also contains what might be the truest line of dialogue in the entire series for understanding it, though I will paraphrase rather than quote it exactly because it is spoken so plainly it is easy to walk past. Iroh tells Zuko, in effect, that it is never too late to change course, that a person is not bound forever by the worst things they have done or the path they were set on. That is the thesis of the whole show, stated by the one character wise enough to know it. Everything Zuko becomes, everything the series is arguing about redemption and choice and the possibility of becoming better than the people who made you, is contained in an old man gently telling his broken nephew that he does not have to stay the way he is. The series gives its central truth to its gentlest character and lets him say it over a cup of tea, and if you were only half watching, you might have missed that you were being handed the key to everything. Let me gather up a handful of the smaller details now, the ones that do not need a whole chapter, but that reward you the moment you notice them. Start with the arrows on Aang's head. Those blue arrows, running up his arms and legs and spine and over his scalp to a point on his forehead, are so iconic that most people never stop to ask where they come from or what they mean. They are not a random tattoo. They are modeled on the natural markings in the fur of the sky bison, the great flying beasts like Appa, who were, in the mythology of this world, the original airbenders, the animals who first taught humans how to bend the air. So an airbending master wears, on his own skin, a tribute to the creatures who gave his people their art. The arrows are a thank you letter written across the body. And they are not given out freely. They are earned, awarded only to those who achieve true mastery of airbending, who pass all 36 levels of the discipline, or invent a wholly new technique of their own, which is the rarer path that Aang took. He became a master and received his arrows at an unusually young age, which is part of why he was such a prodigy. The arrows also trace the paths along which a bender's inner energy is said to flow through the body, which is why they glow when Aang enters the avatar state. That glow is not decoration either. It is the light of the avatar spirit shining out along the exact channels the tattoos mark. Here is a smaller one about the Kyoshi warriors, the fierce, all-female fighters Sokka trains with, the ones in the green robes with the white face paint and the metal fans. Their whole look, the makeup and the armor and the fighting style is a direct homage to a past avatar, Kyoshi, the towering Earth Kingdom woman who founded them. When you see Suki and her warriors in that dramatic white and red face paint, you are looking at a living tradition honoring a specific dead avatar, keeping her image alive centuries after her death by literally wearing her face into battle. And there is a lovely bit of gender play in it, because when Sokka, who begins the series as a bit of a chauvinist, wants to train with them, he has to swallow his pride and wear the robes and the makeup too, and it becomes part of how the series sands down his early arrogance. The warriors who dress as a dead avatar teach the boy some humility. Then there is King Bumi, who is one of the great hidden depths of the series disguised as a lunatic. When Aang reaches the city of Omashu, he finds it ruled by an ancient, cackling, seemingly mad old king named Bumi, who puts Aang through a series of bizarre and pointless-seeming challenges. It plays as pure comedy. But there is a reveal folded inside it, because Bumi turns out to be Aang's oldest living friend, a boy Aang knew 100 years earlier, before the ice, now grown impossibly old, one of the very few people alive who remembers the world as it was before the war. The Mad King is a grieving old man who has outlived everyone and everything he knew, playing the fool partly because the alternative is unbearable. And Bumi carries a philosophy the show clearly prizes, the idea of neutral Jing, of waiting, of doing nothing until exactly the right moment, and then striking with everything. In a series full of characters who act, Bumi is the master of patience, and when he finally chooses to free his own city, he does it alone, in a single afternoon, having simply waited 100 years for the right day. The comic relief king is one of the mightiest earthbenders in the world, biding his time. A few more quickly, because they are the kind of thing you only catch on a rewatch. The bounty hunter June, who tracks the group using her enormous eyeless creature called a shirshu, a beast that hunts entirely by an overwhelming sense of smell, is a small marvel of consistent design because the animal has no eyes at all, and the series never forgets it, always having the creature navigate by scent and by the flick of its tongue. When the group needs to find someone unfindable later in the series, it is June and her nose-guided monster they come back to, a piece of the world reused with care. There is Sokka, again, whose habit of drawing terrible little cartoons and making bad plans on paper becomes a running character note, the ideas guy who cannot draw. There is the recurring appearance of certain foods and certain running jokes, the way Avatar keeps tracking Sokka's endless hunger as almost a character trait in itself. And there is the simple, easily missed fact that the entire series takes place over roughly a single year, that the whole vast arc, from a boy frozen in ice to the fall of a Fire Lord, happens in about 12 months, which is why the relationships deepen so fast and burn so bright. These are children who meet as strangers and become a family over the course of one intense, world-changing year, and the series never wastes a day of it. And one last small thing that ties a bow on how densely built this world is. When the group first travels to that theater on Ember Island and watches the play about themselves, one of the running gags is how much the stage version gets wrong, how it flattens and mocks each of them. But the deepest joke is that the play is not really wrong about everything. It exaggerates, but it exaggerates true things, Sokka's jokes, Zuko's obsession with honor, Aang's gentleness read as childishness. The series is confident enough to let a bad in-universe play roast its own heroes accurately. to laugh at itself in the voice of hack actors, and to trust that you love these characters enough to laugh along without loving them any less. That is a very secure piece of storytelling, a show near its own ending, pausing to make fun of itself. And it works because by that point you know these people so well that the caricatures only make them dearer. One of the boldest things this show does, and something a lot of viewers only appreciate on reflection, is refuse to let the Fire Nation be a faceless, evil empire. It would have been so easy to make the enemy nation nothing but stormtroopers in red, an endless supply of villains to knock down. Instead, in Book 3, when the group has to hide inside the Fire Nation itself, the show takes the time to walk you through the enemy's daily life. And what you find there is not monsters. It is people. Ordinary, decent, misled people, and children most of all. There is an episode where Aang, needing to blend in, actually enrolls in a Fire Nation school, pretending to be a local boy. And what he discovers there is at once the darkest and the tenderest thing the series could show you, which is that Fire Nation kids are just kids. They are not cruel. They want to have fun, they want to dance, they are curious and bored and playful, and they have been fed a version of the world since birth that they have no reason to question. Aang, horrified and delighted in equal measure, ends up throwing them a secret dance party because these children have been raised in a culture so rigid and so militarized that they have never even been allowed to dance freely. The enemy, up close, turns out to be a room full of kids who just needed permission to be young. That is a far braver choice than making them villains, because it forces the audience to sit with the truth that the foot soldiers of an evil war are mostly just people who were born on the wrong side of it and taught to believe it was the right one. And Avatar lets you see exactly how that belief gets made if you pay attention to the background of that schoolroom. The Fire Nation children are taught history, and the history they are taught is a lie, a piece of state propaganda dressed up as education. In their version, the war is noble, their nation is generous, and in the detail that lands hardest, the air nomads are recast entirely. The genocide, the extermination of a peaceful people, is taught to Fire Nation children as a glorious victory over an army, the air nomad army, as though those pacifist monks had been a military threat that the brave Fire Nation put down. The nation that murdered a defenseless people has rewritten the murder in its own classrooms as a battle against dangerous enemies. It is a chillingly accurate portrait of how real empires teach their own atrocities, and the series slips it into the background of a light-hearted episode about a boy trying to fit in at school. If you were not listening closely, you would miss that you were being shown exactly how a whole nation of ordinary, kind people can be raised to accept the unforgivable. This is the same nation, remember, that produced Iroh and Zuko and Ursa and the kind prison guard, and all the vacationing families on Ember Island. The series is careful, again and again, to remind you that the Fire Nation is not evil in its blood. It is a nation that was captured by an ideology, top to bottom, and taught to believe that its cruelty was strength and its conquest was kindness. Which is why the ending the show chooses matters so much, because the goal is never to destroy the Fire Nation. It is to free it, to break the ideology and let the ordinary decent people underneath it come back to themselves. The war is not good people against bad people. It is a whole culture that lost its way, and a handful of its own children, Zuko chief among them, who have to find the courage to turn against everything they were raised to believe. The mechanics of the war carry the same care, and there is one piece of it that pays off a rule we touched on earlier. Firebending, as we established, comes from the sun, which means that when the sun is blotted out, firebending stops. And the series builds an entire invasion around that fact. The group learns of a coming solar eclipse, a day when the moon will pass fully in front of the sun, and for a few minutes, every firebender in the world will lose their power completely. They name it the Day of Black Sun, and they plan the whole invasion of the Fire Nation capital around that narrow window, the one moment when the strongest benders on the planet will be as helpless as anyone else. It is a beautiful piece of plotting because it takes an established rule of the world, the solar source of fire, and turns it into a ticking clock and a battle plan. And Avatar plays fair with it in both directions because the enemy figures it out too, and the invasion does not go as hoped. But the elegance of it, an army timing its entire assault to a few minutes of eclipse because that is the only window in which fire can be beaten, is the kind of thing that only works because the series established its rules honestly and then trusted them. And set against that eclipse, at the other end of the story, is the comet, the two celestial events forming the frame of the whole final book. The eclipse is the moment firebenders are weakest, and the group tries to use it and fails. The comet is the moment firebenders are strongest, and the enemy plans to use it to burn down the world. The entire third season is stretched between those 2 points in the sky, the darkening that favors the heroes and the burning that favors the villains, and the story races from the failed hope of the one to the desperate stakes of the other. It is the sun and the moon, the two forces that govern this whole world, arranging the shape of its final act. Once you see that frame, the whole of Book 3 snaps into a single elegant structure: dark sun to bright comet, weakness to overwhelming power, and a boy who has to find a way to win in the exact moment his enemy is strongest. Which brings us, near the end, to the finale itself, and to the choice at the center of it, because the way the series resolves its own story is the fullest expression of everything it had been arguing for 3 seasons. The problem Aang faces on the eve of the comet is not really a fighting problem. He is powerful enough by then to stand against the Fire Lord. The problem is moral. Everyone around him, everyone he respects, is telling him that to save the world, he is going to have to kill Ozai. And every cell in Aang's body refuses. And the show does something remarkable with that refusal. It does not let Aang off easily, and it does not let his friends talk him out of it. Instead, it sends him to the only people whose authority he cannot dismiss, his own past lives. Aang goes into the spirit world and consults the avatars who came before him, and one by one they tell him the same hard thing. The past life from the air nomads, his own people, the gentlest and most spiritual of them all, tells him that being the avatar sometimes means sacrificing your own spiritual needs for the good of the world. The warrior from the Earth Kingdom tells him to do whatever it takes, that only justice will bring peace. The Fire Nation avatar tells him to be decisive. The Water Tribe avatar tells him to actively shape his own destiny. All of them, in their different voices, are telling this gentle boy that he must be willing to end a life. Even the accumulated wisdom of 1,000 years of avatars is lined up against him. And Aang still says no. He decides that the wisdom of every avatar before him is wrong, or at least not right for him, and that he will find another way even though not one of his own past selves can tell him what it is. That is an astonishing thing for a story to let its hero do, to stand alone against the unanimous counsel of every authority it has established, including his own soul, and to be proven right. Because Aang does find the third path, the one we discussed earlier, the ancient power that lets him take away Ozai's firebending without taking his life. And he can only walk that path because he refused, absolutely, to compromise the one thing that made him who he is. The series had spent the whole series teaching that letting go of anger and fear is strength, that the enemy is people, that violence is the language of the nation that lost its way. It would have betrayed all of that to have its pacifist hero win by becoming a killer. So it did the harder thing, it made him hold his line, and it built him a way to win without breaking it. Aang defeats the deadliest man in the world and remains completely the boy the monks raised. His victory is not that he was strong enough to kill, it is that he was strong enough not to. And running alongside Aang's refusal is the other great sacrifice of the finale, the one that shows the same value from a different angle. While Aang faces Ozai, Zuko faces his sister Azula in the final firebending duel for the throne, with Katara beside him. And at the decisive moment, Azula, cornered and unraveling, aims a bolt of lightning not at Zuko, but at Katara, knowing it will wound him more to watch her die. And Zuko, without a heartbeat of hesitation, throws himself into its path. He takes the lightning meant for the girl he has come to love as family, redirecting what he can but absorbing the rest, and it nearly kills him. It is the complete inversion of the Zuko we met at the start, the boy who would have done anything to capture the Avatar for his father. The finished Zuko throws his own body in front of a friend to save her life. The scarred prince, who spent 2 seasons chasing his own worth, finally proves it by nearly dying to protect someone else. Katara then defeats Azula and heals Zuko, and the last of the royal children who could still be saved are saved together. There is a final image Avatar leaves you with that I think about often, and it is not a battle. After everything, after the war is won and Ozai is caged and Zuko is crowned Fire Lord, Zuko goes to visit his father in prison, not to gloat, but to ask him a single question. He wants to know what happened to his mother, Ursa, who vanished from his life years earlier. And the series ends, essentially, on that question hanging in the air, a newly crowned young king standing before his broken father asking, simply, "Where is my mother?" The series does not answer it. It lets the story close on a boy who has gained a nation and still just wants to find his mom. And that is the whole spirit of the thing in a single frame. The insistence that under all the elements and empires and destinies, these are children. And what they want most is the ordinary tender things, a family, a mother, a place to belong. The war ends, and the last note the series plays is not triumph. It is a son missing his mother. I find that a braver and truer ending than any amount of spectacle, and it is exactly the kind of small human choice this show made, over and over, in the places most stories do not bother to look. Before we drift toward the close, let me gather a few facts from outside the frame, the sort of production and structural details that change how you think about the shape of the thing you watched. Start with the vocabulary the show uses for itself, because even that is deliberate. We call them seasons, but the series never does. It calls them books, Book 1, Book 2, Book 3, each named for an element, water, earth, and fire, in the order Aang has to master them. And it does not call the individual episodes, it calls them chapters. So the whole series presents itself not as a television show, but as a piece of literature, a 3-volume book with chapters, which is a small framing choice that tells you how seriously it took its own storytelling. When a title card reads Book 1, Chapter 1, it is inviting you to treat what follows the way you would treat a novel, and Avatar earns that invitation. The scale of it is smaller than people remember, which is part of why it is so tightly built. The entire series is only 61 episodes, 20 in the first book, 20 in the second, 21 in the third. That is not many. A single season of a typical American network show could run nearly that long. And into those 61 chapters, the creators packed an entire world, a mythology, a war with a century of history, a dozen fully realized characters, and one of the more satisfying complete arcs in animation, with almost no filler and almost nothing wasted. It premiered in the winter of 2005 and finished in the summer of 2008, so the whole thing was made and aired in a little over 3 years, which for a show of this density is remarkable. It knew where it was going, it went there efficiently, and it stopped when the story was done, which is a discipline a great many longer shows never manage. There is a small piece of international trivia that catches people off guard. In some parts of the world, the series did not air under the name we know. In a number of regions, including parts of Europe, it was broadcast as Avatar, The Legend of Aang rather than Avatar, The Last Airbender. And when the live-action film adaptation came out at the end of the decade, it was released under the shortened title The Last Airbender, dropping the word Avatar from the front entirely. The widely repeated explanation is that this was to avoid confusion with James Cameron's enormous science fiction film Avatar, which had come out shortly before and made the single word Avatar mean something completely different to the general public for a while. I will flag that as the commonly told story rather than something I can hand you from an official source. But the timing certainly lines up, and it is a strange bit of history that a beloved cartoon had to partly surrender its own name because a blockbuster happened to borrow the same word. Here is something worth stepping back to appreciate. This was, at bottom, an American cartoon, made for an American children's network, and yet it is built almost entirely on Eastern philosophy and Eastern culture, taken seriously and rendered with real respect rather than as exotic decoration. The spiritual spine of the series is Taoist and Buddhist. The bending is real Chinese martial arts. The writing is real Chinese calligraphy. The 4 nations are careful portraits of real Asian cultures. The Avatar himself is a reincarnating bridge between the physical and spirit worlds, a concept drawn straight from the religious traditions of that part of the world. It would have been so easy to do this shallowly, to grab a few aesthetics and slap them onto a generic hero's journey. Instead, the creators, 2 Americans who met at art school, did the reading, hired the consultants, and built something that people from the cultures it draws on have largely embraced as thoughtful rather than appropriative. That is rare, and it is a large part of why the show has aged as gracefully as it has. It was made with humility toward its own sources. And the story did not stop when the series ended, though I will keep this brief and clearly marked because it moves into other works with their own separate histories. The tale continues in a series of official graphic novels, comics that pick up directly after the finale and answer some of the questions the series deliberately left open, including the mystery of what happened to Zuko's mother. And years later, a full sequel series arrived, set generations after Aang, following the next avatar in the cycle, a young woman from the Water Tribe. And it is in that later era, not in the original show, that the Air Nation is finally reborn, and the deep origins of the very first Avatar are told. I want to keep those clearly separate from the series we have been talking about all night. Within Avatar, The Last Airbender itself, Aang remains the last Airbender from the first frame to the last. Appa remains the presumed last of the Sky Bison. And the world is still in the slow, hard work of healing from 100 years of war. Avatar ends not with everything fixed, but with the possibility of fixing it. A broken world handed to a group of teenagers who have decided to spend their lives putting it back together. Everything after that is another book for another night. There is one last quality I want to name before we close, because it sits underneath every single detail we have talked about tonight, and it is the reason all of them exist. Avatar was written to be two shows at once, a show for the child watching it live on a Saturday, and a show for the adult that child would become, and it never made either of them wait for the other. That is the trick, and it is much harder than it sounds. Most family entertainment picks a lane. It is either a kid's show with a couple of jokes lobbed over the heads of children for the parents in the room, or it is a serious story that tolerates children as an audience. Avatar refused to choose. It is truly completely a children's adventure, bright and funny and full of slapstick and silly animal noises, and it is also, in the exact same frames, a story about genocide and grief and the corruption of a nation and the difficulty of forgiveness. You can watch a scene where Sokka, having eaten something he should not have out in the desert, hallucinates wildly and babbles nonsense, and it is pure, broad, childish comedy, a boy talking to a mushroom, and children howl at it. But that same desert sequence is one of the darkest stretches in the series, because it comes right after Appa has been stolen and Aang is spiraling into rage and despair, and the group is dehydrated and frightened and coming apart. The comedy and the anguish are braided together so tightly that a child sees a funny episode about being lost in the sand, and an adult sees a group of traumatized kids barely holding on. Neither reading is wrong, both are fully present. The series is doing both jobs at once and shortchanging neither. And that is why it holds up when you come back to it as an adult. You're not returning to a childish thing and feeling embarrassed by it. You're discovering that the thing you loved as a child was always, secretly, also for the adult you had not become yet. That is the real answer to why this show is so stuffed with hidden detail, the calligraphy and the martial arts and the buried foreshadowing and the name meanings and the deaths handled with such care. None of it was showing off. It was all built on the belief that the audience, even the youngest part of it, deserved a world that was true all the way down, that would reward them not just once but every time they came back to it with more life behind their eyes. The creators made a show you could grow into rather than out of, and they did it by refusing to leave anything hollow. Every wall has real writing on it, because a real world has real writing on its walls. Every fight is a real martial art because they respected the audience too much to fake it. Every throwaway character has a history because a living world does not have throwaway people in it. The density is not decoration, it is a kind of honesty and insistence that the world be actually built rather than merely suggested, and children can feel that even when they cannot name it. It is why a whole generation did not just enjoy this show but trusted it, and why they are still, all these years later, going back to walk through its rooms one more time. There is one character we have circled all night without giving her a section of her own, and that is Katara, which is fitting, because Katara is the one holding everyone else together, usually without being thanked for it. And she carries a small object that is one of the loveliest buried threads in the whole show, hidden in plain sight around her neck the entire time. It is her necklace, a blue pendant carved with a flowing water design, and for most of the series it reads as simply a piece of water tribe jewelry, a keepsake from her grandmother. But its full story ties two ends of the world together in a way you only catch when the pieces come to rest. The necklace belonged to Katara's grandmother, the old woman the group calls Gran, whose name is Kanna. And when the group reaches the northern water tribe and meets the stern old waterbending master Paku, who at first refuses to teach Katara at all because she is a girl, the necklace becomes the thing that finally softens him. Paku recognizes it because he carved it himself a lifetime ago as a betrothal necklace for the woman he loved and intended to marry, a young Kanna. And Kanna, unwilling to accept the rigid, unequal life the northern tribe demanded of its women, had left him, fled all the way to the South Pole, and built a new life there, carrying the necklace of the man she would not marry with her for the rest of her days. So the ornament around Katara's neck is the physical trace of her grandmother's rebellion, a token of a love refused for the sake of freedom, carried across the whole world from the North Pole to the South, and down 2 generations to the granddaughter who would come back north and demand the very equality her grandmother had run away to find. The bending master who will not teach the girl is the same man the girl's grandmother would not marry. The series ties that knot without underlining it, and it turns a simple necklace into a family history and a quiet argument about freedom all at once. Katara herself is worth appreciating for how much load she carries in the group, and how the show slowly lets you see the cost of it. She is the heart, the caretaker, the one who cooks and heals and comforts and keeps the peace. And she took on that role young, because her mother was killed by the Fire Nation when she was a little girl, and someone had to become the mother of a broken family. So much of Katara is that wound, the child who had to grow up too fast, who mothers everyone around her because she lost her own mother and cannot bear to lose anyone else. It is why she reacts so fiercely to injustice, why she cannot walk past suffering, why she is the one who insists on stopping to help the poisoned village and the enslaved earthbenders and every wounded thing they pass. Her compassion is not a soft, decorative trait. It is forged out of grief, and it is arguably the strongest force in the entire group, stronger in its way than any bending, because it is the thing that keeps 4 traumatized children behaving like a family instead of falling apart. Aang saves the world, but Katara, over and over, is the one who saves the people actually in front of her. The series knows the difference, and it never once lets her care be mistaken for weakness. So here we are, at the end of a long walk through the small rooms of one of the best love stories ever made for a screen. And if you have stayed with me this far, and if your eyes have been getting heavier the way I hope they have, then let me bring us gently down. What stays with me after all of it is not any single detail. It is the accumulation. It is the fact that you can pick almost any frame of this show, freeze it, and find that someone cared about it. The writing on the wall is real. The way the character is standing is a real martial art. The name they were given means something. The joke they just made will pay off 2 seasons from now, or paid off 2 seasons ago, and either way, somebody planned it. There is a version of Avatar that could have been just as exciting and just as funny and reached just as many children, made with 1/10 of the care, and almost nobody would have complained, because children are not supposed to notice these things. The people who made this show gave them the care anyway. They built a world that was true all the way to the bottom, for an audience they trusted to feel that truth even before they could explain it. That is a kind of respect, and it is rare, and it is the reason we are still here, years and years later, talking about a cartoon as though it were a piece of literature, because in every way that matters, it is one, and that is why it has lasted the way it has. Avatar. The Last Airbender did not fade the way most children's television fades, remembered fondly and never revisited. It grew. The children who watched it became adults who put it on for their own children and found, watching it again over their kids' shoulders, that it had been holding depths they were too young to reach the first time. The grief inside the comedy, the philosophy inside the fights, the way it had been gently telling them how to hold their anger and how to let go of their pain. It became one of those rare stories that a person can carry through an entire life, meaning one thing to them at 8 and another at 18 and another again at 35. Always honest, always waiting with a little more than you had the eyes to see last time. Very few things made for children ever managed that. This one did it almost without trying because it was built from the first frame to be worth returning to. I hope, if nothing else, that tonight gave you a few new things to look for the next time you drift back to it. A few details to catch that you walked past before. A reason to watch the writing on the walls and the way the firebenders move and the color of a princess's hair. There is always more in there. That is the promise Avatar makes and keeps. You can rewatch it a dozen times, and the 13th will still hand you something small and perfect that you somehow never noticed. A tile placed just so, a face turned to hide a scar, a joke, a dead monk made 100 years ago. A world that deep does not run out. It just waits for you to look again. But that is for another day. For now, there is nothing left to do but rest. Let the images settle, the sky bison and the tea shop and the boy in the iceberg, and let them carry you down into sleep the way the story always carried its people through the dark and out the other side. You do not need to hold on to any of it. It will all still be here, every detail exactly where it was, the next time you come looking. Thank you for spending this time with me, and thank you as always for letting these long, quiet nights be part of how you fall asleep. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.